Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome to the video. So this video is going to be basically just a full walkthrough of the React library, the React framework. So I'm going to be essentially teaching you this from the ground up. So we'll start with some of the really core concepts and we'll talk about what React does. And then I'll slowly introduce to you what I would consider to be the most important concepts in React and the concepts that you're going to use 80% of the time when you're out there developing. So there are just a few things that if you really understand them in React, then you can go out and be effective in it. So maybe the first question is why should you learn React? So what is it about this framework React that's so special and why do so many people use it? Well, React is a library or a framework. Basically, it's a collection of code that some really, really smart developers have been working on for the last decade or so. And what it does is it allows us to build user interfaces for websites and also for other things like mobile apps and desktop apps really easily. So React is really concerned with user interfaces or UIs. And so generally, anytime we're talking about an application, there's two parts to that application. So we have a front end or the user interface, and then we have a back end where sort of all the logic is done. So the front end is what the user interacts with. So this is where we have buttons and forms and the user can click and the website will respond to the user. And then the back end is generally where data is stored, generally where we're determining if a user can do something, we're storing credentials, we're doing all sorts of stuff on the back end. So React isn't concerned with storing data, user credentials, it's not really concerned with any of that. It's more so concerned about building user interfaces that the user can interact with, so getting data from a user and then also displaying information to a user. So if you're going to learn React, the first thing that you have to know is JavaScript. So that's definitely one of the prerequisites for learning this stuff. You should know at least the basics of JavaScript. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to understand all the concepts that are in JavaScript, but it would definitely help to know it because I'm just going to kind of assume that you at least know the basics. And I have videos on this channel that you can use to learn all of that. But my approach with teaching React is going to be just to start from the ground up. So we're actually going to be looking at how you could build user interfaces and how you could build interactive websites without React. And I'll just show you that really quickly. We'll build some small little component and then we'll convert that over into React so you can see kind of why React is useful and some of the benefits that we get from using it. Cool. So I think that's a good introduction and now we can just get started on learning. So the first thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to have an IDE or a text editor. Now there's a bunch of these different text editors. This is just a program that we can use to write code in. I'm using one which is called VS Code. It's probably the most popular one right now. I think it's really useful. So that's what I'm going to be using. And then you're also going to need a web browser. Okay. So if you want to download VS Code, then you can follow along exactly with what I'm doing. But if you don't want to, then there's a bunch of other ones as well. It doesn't really matter. And then another thing we're going to need is a folder where we can put all of these different files. So I have a folder here, which I created called Intro to React. And then inside of here, I just have an index.html file, and it just has this basic code in it right here. Okay, so we have the head of this HTML document, and we have the body. So another prerequisite I forgot to mention is you're also going to need to know HTML and then maybe a little bit of CSS. So you should have a good feel for the basics of web development. Then you can kind of move into React and start building some seriously powerful reusable websites and stuff like that. Okay, so we have our document here, which is laid out, and this is where everything's going to start from. So anytime that we're building a website, anytime we're doing anything with the web, generally it's going to take place in an HTML file. So there's all sorts of complex ways to build websites. There's all sorts of build processes, all sorts of ways that we can minify our code and compress it and then display it on websites. But at the end of the day, it always comes back to an HTML file. And so as we begin our React journey here, that's where we're going to start, just here in this HTML file. And like I said, the first thing I'll do is walk you through building something just using what we call vanilla JavaScript. So just using the JavaScript that's built into every browser. And then we'll start to add React onto that. And I'll show you how this can get a little bit more complex. So what I'd like to do is build a little component, which is kind of a counter button. This is sort of the hello world example. If you learn any other programming languages, this is the hello world example for these UI frameworks. It's just a little button and you click the button and then a counter goes up. So I click the button once and then it says 1, I click it again, it says 2, etc. So it's just incrementing like that. So let's get started here. You're going to need this little HTML template, and then you also want to open the HTML document over here on your web browser. So if you're in VS Code or pretty much any of these IDEs, if you just find this in your file system, it doesn't matter if you're on Windows or Mac, but there's a button here. It says Reveal in Finder. So basically you want to find this file in your file system, and then you want to open it with your browser. So in my case, I'm using Google Chrome. And so that's what I have over here. So if I was to modify this and save it, and then I refresh the page, you'll see that it gets updated over there. So that's basically all we're doing. So this is sort of our workflow, and this is the same workflow that we're gonna have throughout the entire video. Okay, so we wanna build our little increment counter button. So let's start writing out some HTML. So the first thing I'm gonna do is create a button, and this button is gonna have the text +1. So if I save this, we can refresh over here. Now what I want to happen is whenever I click this button, I want to increment a counter. And so then let's come over here, and why don't we create a div, and this is just gonna have a 0 in it because right now the count is gonna be 0. So this is a very simple component. And like I said, we're gonna build this using just normal JavaScript, the JavaScript that's built into every browser, the JavaScript that's been around since the 90s. So we have our button and we have our div. Now, whenever we're using this vanilla JavaScript stuff, we always need a way to be able to identify these elements. So in order to do that, we can just put an ID on here. So this is an ID attribute. Why don't we give this button, we'll call it the increment button. And then let's give an ID to this div as well. So why don't we call this the count display? So we have our increment button, we have our count display. And what I would like to happen is whenever I click on this +1, then this 0 is going to increment. So it'll just go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Okay, so if we're traditionally doing this, if we're doing this a traditional way in JavaScript, what we'd want to do is we'd either want to create a script tag down here, and my text editor is doing that for me. And then in here, we could write some JavaScript code, and then that would get executed. But probably an easier way to do this would just be to create another file. So I'm going to create a file which is right next to this, and why don't we call this index.js. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to link this file up with this HTML document. So you want to create 2 script tags down here, and then we're just going to say that the source is equal to index.js. And so what's happening now is we're creating these 2 script tags, and that's going to tell HTML that it needs to sort of import this JavaScript code. So if I was to write some JavaScript code, why don't we just create an alert, hello world, and I save this. Now over here, if I refresh, you'll see that we're getting that alert. So this JavaScript file is now hooked up to this HTML file. So hopefully you're following along so far. All we have here is just 2 HTML elements. We have a button, we have a div. We gave them unique identifiers, right? Increment button and count display. And then we linked up an index.js file into this HTML. Now, one thing that's really important whenever we do this is you want to make sure that this JavaScript file is below all of your HTML. And that's just because we want this HTML to be loaded before we load this index.js script. Okay, so just make sure that this is the last line in the body tags here, and you're good to go. Okay, so with vanilla JS, right, with just like normal JavaScript, we're not using React, how would we go about doing this? Well, the first thing that we need to do is we need to be able to get access to these 2 HTML elements. Okay, so that's the first thing. And really, anytime that we're doing anything with JavaScript, we always need to be able to access these different elements, right? So I have this button and I have this div. I want to be able to access those in my JavaScript code so that I can sort of modify them, so that I can change them, so I can change the way that they're displaying. Now, this maybe brings us to something called the DOM. So if you've ever learned JavaScript before, maybe you've heard about this, DOM. It stands for Document Object Model. And I just want to give a quick overview of what the DOM is, just to kind of refresh everyone's memory or to teach you if you don't know it, because this concept of the DOM is really important when we start getting into building user interfaces and specifically with React. So to understand what React's doing, it's very important to understand the DOM. So the document object model is the way that JavaScript gets connected to HTML. So we have these 2 different languages, right? We have this markup language, which is HTML, and we use this to describe the user interface of our site. So I can describe all the different elements like a button or a div or a script tag, etc. And then we have JavaScript, which is this fully functional programming language, and we can use it to do all sorts of stuff. So how do we connect those 2 things together? Well, we do that using something called the DOM. And the DOM is something that's going to be implemented in all of the different browsers that you're using. So the DOM is basically a representation of all of this HTML as a JavaScript object. Okay, so JavaScript, and again, like this is where these prerequisites kind of come in. You should know at least a little bit about what a JavaScript object is. But a JavaScript object is just like a data structure where we can store information in JavaScript and then we can sort of modify it and use it. So whenever you load up an HTML page on your browser, just like we did over here, your browser is going to parse through the HTML and it's going to create something called the DOM. It's going to create this document object model, okay? And the document object model just stores a representation of this HTML page in JavaScript in a way that we can sort of modify and work with in JavaScript. And whenever we modify this DOM, object using what we call the DOM API, that will actually update whatever is over here on the browser. Okay, so that's one of the really core concepts that we need to understand if we want to get into React, is this idea of the DOM. Okay, so it's the way that HTML and JavaScript get linked up together, and it's the way that you can modify your HTML that shows up here on the page through JavaScript. And at the end of the day, that's all React is really doing. It's manipulating this DOM that the browsers created. It's just doing it in a really like smart and fast and efficient way. Okay, so that's a little bit about the DOM. I think that's probably good enough for now. And so when we come over here into our JavaScript, what we need to do is we need to be able to get access through the DOM to these elements. So this button is represented in that DOM somewhere. This div is represented in that DOM somewhere. And let's just take a quick look. So I'm going to console.log document, if I can spell. So I'm going to console.log out the document, and this document right here, like I said, this is something that's given to us by the browser. So any browser that loads up your HTML page, it's going to provide you a document object, okay? And you can refer to it just like this with document. So it's almost like a reserved word. Like you shouldn't name anything else document. So if I refresh this page, now you'll see that the document is going to get basically printed out here. And if I sort of lower this down, now Chrome has some really good tools that will allow me to sort of debug this, but this is actually just a JavaScript object. Now you'll see over here, if we come down to the body, I can actually hover over like this button, for example, and it's getting highlighted. I can hover over this count display, it's getting highlighted. And so what I want to do is I want to actually grab those elements from this DOM object. And then once I've grabbed them, then I can kind of like manipulate them and stuff. So let's go ahead and do that. And so what we want to do is we can say document dot, and you'll see here that a bunch of these different, we call these functions are showing up, right? So there's actually a couple different ways to do this, just so you know, but kind of the classic is like GetElementById. And so what this is going to allow me to do is I can make an open and close parentheses, and then I can pass in the ID of the element that I want to get access to. So over here in index.html, we have this increment button ID. So over here, I'm just going to put that in here. And what we'll do is we'll store this into a variable. So I'm going to create a constant, and I'm going to call this increment button, and I'm going to set it equal to this. Okay, so constant increment button, it's equal to all of this. Now let's print this out and see what we're doing. So if we print this out, now you'll see that I have access to this down here. Now, once again, this isn't really React code, but the whole reason I'm showing you this is because I want to draw parallels between how this is traditionally done and how it's done in React. And that way you have a better idea of why React is so useful as opposed to just doing it this way. Okay, so we have access to our increment button now. And another thing that we want to do is we want to get access to this counter. Okay, so we call this the count display. And I also want to get access to that. So we'll say count display, and this is going to be the same thing. So document.getElementById, and in here we'll put the count display. Cool. So now we have access to the increment button and the count display. Now, one of the things we can do with these, we call these the DOM APIs, the document APIs, is we can modify these. And this is essentially what React is going to end up doing for us. But I could, for example, say count display.innerText is equal to, and I can make this a 1 now. So if I do this and I save it, and then we refresh the page, you'll see over here now this turns into a 1. We could also do the same thing with the increment button. So I could say increment button.innerText, and we could change this to like +9 or something like that. And then if we refresh, you can see all that changes. So this is kind of through the DOM, we're able to update the HTML that the user is seeing. And that's, again, one of the core concepts with React is that we want to be able to do this in a way that's really efficient, in a way that's really fast, and in a way that's reusable. And React will give that to us. Okay, so let's get on with this little counter. So what I want to happen, once again, is whenever I click on this +1, I want this to increment, right? So I want it to change from a 0 to a 1 to a 2 to a 3, etc. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to be able to listen for when the user clicks on this +1 button. So when the user clicks on this +1 button, I want to be able to do something. And that's really the whole core of what JavaScript was about. JavaScript is about responding to what the user's doing on the browser. We can do that a little bit with CSS, but really JavaScript gives us the ability to listen for and respond to a bunch of different browser events, one of them being a click. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna say increment button dot add event listener. And this is another one of those like DOM API methods, okay? And what this will allow us to do is it'll allow us to listen for when the user performs some sort of an event on the browser. Now in this case, we wanna listen for the click event, so I'm just gonna put click there. But there are a bunch of other ones like hovers and stuff like that. So we're gonna listen for whenever the user clicks something, and then what I wanna do is I wanna execute some code whenever that happens. So the first argument into this add event listener is just the name of the event that you wanna listen for. And if you wanna look up more of these, you can just Google like DOM API events or something like that. There should be a big list that pops up. But the second argument is gonna be a function. Okay, so in here, I'm gonna actually put an arrow function. So I'm gonna write open and close parentheses, an equal sign, a greater than sign, and then open and close curly brackets. Okay, so this is what we call an arrow function. And this is like, again, this is where that JavaScript prerequisite kind of comes in. You should understand a little bit about what this is. But basically what this means is that anytime the user clicks on the increment button, we're going to execute the code in here. So actually, why don't we do an alert? So you clicked me. Okay, so now whenever I click this button, and make sure that you're refreshing, whenever I click this button, you'll see that we get this alert. It says you click me. Cool. And so now what we've done is we've wired up this increment button into our JavaScript, and we're now able to respond to whenever it gets clicked. Cool. So this is pretty standard JavaScript stuff. Like if you know basic JavaScript, this shouldn't be that surprising what we're doing here. And so what we want to do is whenever the user clicks on this button, we want to increment this count down here. Now, just like all things in programming, there's about a million different ways that we can do this. But one thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a variable over here, and we'll call this current count, and I'm going to set it equal to 0. Now, this current count thing, this is what we would call a piece of state. And this idea of state is another big concept that we're going to be learning about more when we get into React. But different applications are going to have this thing called state. And state is basically just the different values or the different pieces of data that are in your program that are going to affect the user interface. So in this case, the current count, which is going to end up representing this 0 or 1 or 2 or 3, this is a piece of state. It's a piece of data that we're actively keeping track of, okay, that's going to affect the user interface, right? So if the current count is 1, I would want the user interface to reflect that, right? If the current count is 5, I would want this to be 5 over here. So this piece of state is actually just going to be sort of the representation in our JavaScript of what should be displayed to the user right there. And that's a really, really, really core concept in computer programming, is this idea of like application state, UI state. There's different ways that you can say it, but that's the idea, right? So the current count here, this is sort of the source of truth, and this should always be represented over here on the browser, okay? So that's a little bit about state. So the current count, we'll start it off at 0. And then what we want to do over here is whenever the increment button is clicked, we want to increment this. So we can say current count ++. Okay. So the user clicks on this button, right? We increment the count. And then the last thing that we want to do down here is we want to update the DOM. Okay. We want to update this JavaScript object, which links us to our HTML. And whenever we update the DOM, like we saw before with that inner text thing, it'll update on the browser. So then what we want to do here is we want to say count display dot inner text. You could also say inner HTML here, it doesn't matter. Inner text though is fine. And this is going to be equal to the current count. Okay. So Boom, right there. Now let's refresh. Now this should actually be wired up. So whenever I click on this +1, what's going to happen is this event is going to get fired. So this click event, basically this function right here, what I have highlighted, that code's going to get executed. We're going to increment the current count. And then over here, we're going to say the count display.innerText is equal to the current count. So that kind of increments it, okay? And so there we go. It's actually not that difficult to do this in vanilla JavaScript, right? So it's actually like, it's kind of easy. This is only a few lines of code. Now, you might be asking, okay, so this is pretty easy. Why do we even need React, right? I could just do this for all these different things. There's really no reason to use anything else. Well, yes, this is a very simple example, but here's the problem is that this technique doesn't really scale very well. And this is something that developers have kind of been battling with since like the 90s when JavaScript first came out, is when you have something simple like an increment counter, this is very easy, right? And when you only have like one piece of state, like the current count, it's actually not that difficult to represent here on the DOM. But if we have hundreds or thousands of these little components, this is what we call them, like these little collections of user interface code, doing it this way gets very messy very fast. And I'll show you an example of this right now. So let's take a quick example. Like let's say that I wanted to have multiple counters here on this page. I wanted to reuse this counter. It's actually not as simple as you might think. So if I wanted to have multiple counters like this, let's say we just want to have one other one, well, I would have to copy all of this code, right? I'm going to need to paste it down here. And then we're going to need to distinguish this differently. So maybe this is increment button 2, this is display count 2, etc. Okay, so now we have to essentially double the amount of HTML code that we're writing. Now let's go over here into our JavaScript. Well, we have access to the increment button and the count display, but we're going to need to get access to the second ones too, right? So let's go do this again. So down here we'll say increment button 2, count display 2, increment button 2, count display 2, etc., right? Okay, we're also going to need this code as well. So let's put this down here. And we'll call this current count 2. And we got to increment current count 2. We got to say count display 2.innerText and then current count 2, right? So look at, just to sort of replicate this, now let's save it and we'll see if it works, right? So now I have, and actually you can see here that I already messed this up. So once again, this is actually a good example. I'm glad this happened because it shows us why this is complicated. So you'll see here that increment button, this should be increment button 2, right? So I messed that up when I was copying down this code. So right away, we're already running into a problem doing this. Now it should actually work. So if I increment this, I can increment this separately. So now we're essentially, I guess you could call it reusing this component or using it again. But the problem is we've basically doubled our source code, okay? And this is one of the main problems that React is trying to solve, is this idea that if I want to duplicate this counter, well, then I essentially have to duplicate the code. And look, there's ways that we could structure this code. We could use functions. We could break it apart so that we're not reusing as much. But at the end of the day, I still have to get access to this button and this count display. And as you saw here, like I actually made a mistake because I forgot to put the 2 there. So when you're using vanilla JavaScript like this, if you're going to want to reuse code, if you're going to want to duplicate things, or even if you're just going to want to have more logic, like imagine in addition to a count, we had like the max count. This is like the maximum that it could go or something like that. So when we start introducing this complexity, it just gets really messy and it gets hard to manage, okay? And so what React is, it's basically a collection of code that allows us to do stuff like this really easy and in a way where we can reuse it over and over again, okay? So React is just like functions to make this process a lot easier, okay? And one of the cool things about React is once you learn it, then you can build user interfaces, not just for the web, but also for mobile apps, also for desktop apps, etc. And who knows what else in the future. I mean, React's probably the most popular front-end library at the moment. Okay, so that's a little bit about the vanilla JS, a little bit about why we even need React, right? And so what I want to do now is I want to show you how we can do this exact same thing with React. Okay, so and as we do this, I'll kind of introduce some of the core concepts in React. So my kind of philosophy as we enter into this React stuff right now is I want to teach you from the ground up how React is set up and how it works. Because I think if you can understand like just from a fundamental level, like how all these things work together, I think you'll just have a better time with React. A lot of tutorials, they'll just kind of throw you into React, and I think that's fine, but I'm going to be kind of working my way up to it step by step. So we're going to learn like each little step, and we'll actually set this up just in this same document right here. Okay, so when we want to start using React, the first thing that we need to do is we need to import the React library. Okay, now there's actually better ways to set up React using this thing called Create React App. We're going to look at that later. For now, I just want to show you how we could take this exact code and just put React into it in a very like simple way. Okay, so what you want to do is we're going to want to get the basically script tags for the React library, and there's 2 script tags that we're going to need. So I have this somewhere over here, and I'll put like links to all this stuff in the description and everything, but this right here, these are the 2 script tags. So you want to copy these script tags. Once again, I'll put links to all this, and then you're going to put them in the head. Okay, so in the head of your document, you're going to paste these 2 scripts, and you'll see here that we have 2 of them. So we have this react.development.js, and then we have react.dom.development.js. Okay, so we'll talk about what the difference between those 2 things are in a second, but just know that these are the 2 things that you need to have. Also very important that you put them in the head of the document, because we're going to want these to load before we load any of our HTML or anything like that. Okay, so the goal here then is just going to be to replicate this counter using React, and we'll work our way up to it. All right, so what we'll do then is let's just get rid of this button, and then we'll get rid of all of this JavaScript code as well. Now, we want to keep index.js in here because this is the JavaScript file that we're going to be working with, okay? But in here, we're actually just going to create a div, and I'm going to give this an ID of root, okay? So this is a very simple div, has an ID of root. Now, this can be an ID of anything, it doesn't matter, but root's kind of like I guess the convention or whatever, so that's what we'll use. Now, believe it or not, when we're writing React code, this is everything that we need in our HTML file. Now you might add some other stuff, depending on the use case, but as far as React is concerned, this is it. We literally don't need anything else here in our HTML. So we just have these 2 script tags up in the head, and then we have this div that has an ID of root. Okay, now let's start talking a little bit about how React is gonna work. So like I said, React's going to allow us to build buttons like this. It'll allow us to build basically any types of components that we can think of. And what React is going to do is React is going to generate all of the HTML and all of the elements and all those different sort of HTML-esque things that we need for us. So we don't need to write any HTML whatsoever. We actually will end up writing something called JSX, which is similar, but React will generate everything that's supposed to go into this HTML file, and it'll generate it here inside of this root element. So let's take a look at how that works. So back over in our index.js, and let's just make sure that this is still wired up and everything because we made some changes. Good, so this is still working. And you can see React's like putting this little message here into our console, that's fine. So whenever we're setting up React, okay, we're inside of our JavaScript file here. There's 2 global variables that are going to be given to us, and we can console log those out. So there's something called React, and then there's something called React DOM, okay? So just by importing these scripts, by putting these script tags over here, the browser is automatically going to download all of this React code for us, and then it'll create a variable called React, and it'll create a variable called React DOM in the global namespace, which we're able to access, okay? So you can always refer to React or React DOM in here. So let's print those out. Let's see what they look like. And we'll take a look over here. So you can see here, this is React, and there's a bunch of different things in here: children, component, fragment, all these different things. We'll talk about some of these, we'll talk about use effect, use state. And then down here is React DOM. So there's these 2 libraries. What's the difference between the 2 of them? Well, React is the library we're going to be working with like 99% of the time. Okay, so React is essentially just a set of JavaScript functions that make building counters and building other UI elements really easy, and it allows us to make them really reusable and stuff like that. Okay, so that's React. React's like the core logic of all of this. The second one down here, React DOM, this is what's going to allow React to render onto the DOM. So React is going to sort of create all of these components, all of these different elements for us, right? And then React DOM is going to know how to put those onto the document object model, okay? And the reason that we have 2 of these is because this React library, not only can it put views onto the browser, like onto the DOM, but it can also put views onto like mobile apps and like desktop apps and stuff like that. So React's like the core library, and then you would use like React DOM, or there's another one called React Native to render onto a particular screen. Okay, maybe that's like too much information, I don't know. But that's kind of the difference between these two. Okay, so if we want React to be able to display information onto the DOM over here, we have to use React DOM. And this is like the one line of code that you're always gonna need in all of your, you're always gonna need this in all of your all the React stuff that you do. Okay, so before we do that though, before we use React DOM, what we need to do is we need to get access to this root div. So we're gonna do this the same exact way that we did it before. I'm gonna call this const, and we'll call this React content root. And I'm gonna set this equal to document.getElementById, and we called this root. So we have access to this root element, just like we did before with the buttons, and that's this guy right here. And then what we wanna do is we want to say React DOM.render. Okay, so React DOM has this render function. What that's gonna do is it's gonna render something, and we'll talk about what that something is later, but it's gonna render something out onto the browser here. So this is gonna take two arguments, okay? We're gonna put two things in here. The first is we're gonna put the content that we want to display over here on the screen. And this is content that's generated by React. What we can do though is just put like a very simple string in here just for now, and I'll show you later how we can create elements. And then the second argument is gonna be the React content root. So we're saying, hey, React DOM, I want you to render the string hello world into the React content root. And so what React DOM is gonna do is it's gonna essentially come in here and it's gonna put hello world right inside of this div, okay? That's what it's gonna do. And we don't need to put anything in there right now, but let's try this out. So I'll refresh the page and you'll see here that hello world is showing up. So it actually worked, like it did what I said it was gonna do. Let's inspect this though. So I'm gonna right click on this and I'm gonna click inspect. This should work on just about any browser. And you'll see here that we now have our, this is the body of our document. And so you'll see here, right, this is that div with the ID of root, and React DOM put hello world in here. So notice over here, there's nothing inside of this div, right? There's absolutely nothing in there. If I can refresh the page as many times as I want, React DOM is putting hello world right inside of there, okay? And so this is the core of how React works. Like if you understand this, you're like, I feel like a lot of React developers actually don't know this. That's been my experience, at least, like talking to people. So React DOM will render this content inside of the React content root. Okay, simple as that. But now here's the thing, right? Can we only render text? Like just being able to render one string of text isn't super useful. And this is where the React library is going to come in. So React DOM can render things onto the browser, right? And can render things onto the DOM. But how do we create things, right? How do we create things that people want to use and create that little button and all that stuff? That's when we have to use the React API, okay? So like I said, React is this library. It's this, people call it a framework, whatever. It's actually more of a library, but it has a bunch of different functions that we can use to create what are called React elements. And these elements are going to get rendered onto the DOM by React DOM. So let's go ahead and create an element just real quick. So I'm going to call this my first element, and let's set this equal to, so this is just a variable, and I'm going to set this equal to React.createElement. Okay, so there's this function that React is going to give us, which is called createElement, and this will allow us to create essentially like an HTML element. Okay, that's kind of the best way to think about it. So HTML, we have all these different elements, right? We have like divs, we have list items, we have unordered lists, right? There's all these different things that we can create in HTML, and we can do the same thing with React. So I can say, hey, React, I want you to create an element, and this is going to take 3 different arguments, which we're going to talk about. So the first argument is going to be the name of the element that you wanted to create. So this is going to be that HTML tag, basically. So you can create a div, you can create a list item, paragraph tag, you create like bold tags. Whatever you want to create, you just put that in here. Okay, so why don't we let's create a list item. Okay, so we're going to create a list item here, or why don't we let's make a list item. Okay, so list item, and then there's another argument here, which is this second one, and this is actually going to be what are called props. And we're going to talk more about props later on, so don't worry. For now, you're just going to put null here. You can also put an empty object. It doesn't matter. I'll put null though. And then the last thing over here is going to be the content that we want to put inside of this list item. Okay, so why don't we just call this like item 1. Now this can be a string. This could also be like another React element, which we'll look at in a second. But let's just start with this. Okay, so one more time, react.createElement. We're going to put the name of the sort of HTML element that we want to create, right? In this case, it's a list item. We're going to put null here. We'll talk about what this is later. And then you're going to put the text or the content that you want to be in that list item. And so now, instead of putting hello world here, let's put my first elements. Perfect. So now I'm going to save this and we'll head over and I'm going to refresh, and you'll see here that we have item 1. So if I inspect this, you'll notice that it's a list item and then it has the text in here. But notice that this is inside of our root element. So that root div, that root element that we created, this list item is going to be right inside of there. Okay, so that's sort of how this all works together. Now, creating one list item is cool, right? But you can imagine, like, what if we want to create more than one list item? Like, this is starting to get a little tedious. Like, do I have to do this every time? No. So what you can do is you can actually put elements like inside of other elements. So over here, like I have this react.createElement. And to demonstrate this, why don't we change this to an unordered list? So this is going to be an unordered list. It's just like a container that we can put list items in. And what I want to do over here is, instead of just putting text, I want to put like a list item inside of this. Okay, so we have our unordered list. I want to put a list item inside of it. So let's do this then. I'm going to make a couple new lines, and then inside of here, so instead of passing in a string, we're going to pass in another one of these elements. So I'm going to say react.createElement, and this is going to be a list item, null, and then why don't we make this item 1, okay? Now my text editor is like formatting this nicely for me. You can copy this formatting too. So now I'm going to refresh this, and it doesn't change too much, but if you look in the actual code, we now have an unordered list, and inside of that we have a list item, okay? So we now have like this more complex structure. And another thing we can do is, instead of just passing in one element, we could pass in an array of elements. So I'm going to create an array here, and then inside of here, I'm going to put this first element, and then why don't we copy this and we'll put a second element as well. So item 2. Okay, and I need to put React here. So let me just, like, obviously this is getting like kind of complicated. I can see that. So we're creating an element that's an unordered list, right? And then inside of that unordered list, we're passing an array of list items. So there's 2 list items here, item 1 and item 2. If we save and refresh, boom, now we have both of these. And let's look at the DOM right here. This is like a view of the DOM. You can see that we have the unordered list and the 2 list items. Now remember, none of this is inside of our HTML file. There's literally nothing here. It's just one line. And that's what you'll find with a lot of these React like index.html files, is it's like the actual file itself is like very small. React is able to generate all of this for us, okay? And so then once again, I just want to highlight the difference between React and React DOM. So React is what we use to create elements. React is used to create the content. It's used to create all of these different things. And React DOM is used to render that onto the DOM. Now, if you're using something like React Native, you would use, instead of React DOM, you'd use like React Native, and it would render it onto like a mobile device, or it could render it onto a desktop or something like that. But that's sort of the differences between those two. Okay, so React is like creating the stuff. React DOM is rendering all of the stuff. Cool. Okay, so obviously this is a lot of stuff. Now, one of the things you're probably asking, you're like, Mike, how on earth am I going to use this to build websites? Like, HTML is so great, right? Because I can I could create an unordered list, right, with like 2 list items, etc. Like, I can map it out like this. It looks really nice, right? This is something that's readable by humans. It's very easy to read. It's very easy to edit. It's also very easy to format. This disaster is gross. Look at this. This is like, no one would ever use this in an actual application, and that's true. And so when React came out, they included, obviously, this like create element stuff, all of that, but they also included something called JSX. And I don't think that the React team actually created JSX, but JSX is a syntax that can be used to essentially replicate this code right here. So I'm going to kind of give you like a little demonstration of how this works, and we'll take a look. So JSX, like I said, it's a syntax that's very similar to HTML, but we use it inside of our JavaScript files. And so instead of doing like react.createElement, unordered list, and list item, instead I could say like my JSX element, and I could set this equal to something like this. So I could actually replicate this entire thing using JSX by doing something like this. So I can create like 2 list items, item 1, and then I can create another one down here, which is item 2. Okay, so believe it or not, we can, instead of doing this, inside of our JavaScript file, we can actually write something like this, okay? And React will be able to essentially convert this, or React will interpret this as this stuff up here, okay? Now, how does this happen? How are we able to use what we call JSX, this JSX stuff down here? So JSX isn't built into JavaScript. This isn't something that is included in the JavaScript library. This isn't something that your browser is going to know how to interpret. Your browser can interpret this just fine in an HTML file, but in a JavaScript file, it's a no-go. Okay, this isn't part of the JavaScript, what we call the ECMAScript standard. Okay, so this isn't something that browsers know about. What we need to do is we need to utilize something called a transpiler. And a transpiler is something that's going to be able to take what we call like syntactic sugar. Okay, that's kind of what we call JSX. Basically something that's not part of JavaScript, but that's really convenient. And the transpiler is going to take that and it's going to convert it into something that is JavaScript. So this unordered list code, right, with this list item, this isn't real JavaScript. JavaScript doesn't understand that. So what we want to do is use a transpiler. In this case, it's called Babel. And Babel will be able to convert this into this so that we can use it. Okay, so let me show you how this works real quick. So I'm going to copy this over here. And so from now on, we're going to refer to this as JSX, okay, because it's not in an HTML file, it's in a JavaScript file, so we're calling it JSX. And there are some differences between the two. Now, there's a website that you can go to, which is actually, if you just Google like Babel, it should pop up. So if you go to this Babel website and then click try it out, this will pop up over here. We can make this a little bigger. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to paste in this unordered list code, this JSX that we wrote over here, and Babel is going to run through it and it's going to convert it into code that JavaScript can actually, it's going to convert it into like actual JavaScript code basically. So you see this, I put this code in here, this JSX, and this site basically is the Babel website. So Babel is going to transpile this and it's going to spit out this code over here. Now, if you take a look, you can see here that this code that Babel spit out, aside from all these weird comments and this use strict thing, it's actually very similar to the code that we have over here. So you can see that we still have this like unordered list, right? We're still using create element. In here, we're passing in react.createElement for a list item, and this is getting cut off. And then we have another one over here. So what Babel is able to do is it's able to take code like this, which is code that we're used to writing as people who use HTML, and it can convert it into this kind of gross, nasty, but runnable React code that we have up here. Okay, so this is really what's happening with React, is that we need to use a transpiler. The most popular one is Babel, in order to transpile all of this. Okay, so then the question becomes, how do we set up Babel on our application over here? There's a couple different ways that we can do this, okay? Most of the time, this is gonna happen in the background. So most of the time, you won't have to set any of this up, and we're gonna use something called Create React App, which is actually gonna set this up for us. But I wanna show you how to do it from scratch, just so you have a better understanding of what's actually going on. Okay, so once again, the main goal is instead of using this, I wanna be able to use this. So I essentially wanna be able to get rid of this and just use this stuff over here. So how do we do that? Well, we need to include Babel here in our HTML file. And once again, this isn't the only way you can do this. There's other ways to do this, but this is the simplest way. So once again, on that Babel website, and I'll put a link to this as well. If you go to the setup page, and then you go to like in the browser, there's gonna be something down here, this like little script tag, and this is what we wanna put in the head of our document. Okay, so I'm gonna put this up here in the head. Why don't we put this first? And this is gonna load Babel. Like I said, Babel is this transpiler. Babel will be able to like read through our files, and it'll be able to sort of convert them into something that's actually JavaScript, okay? So we're gonna put that up here, and then what we wanna do over here on this script tag is we wanna change the type. So by default, this will be type JavaScript because that's generally the default. You can see over here that we wanna change it to type of text / Babel. So text / Babel. We're gonna change it like that. And once you do that, so you add the script tag up here, okay, and then you change the type of this script tag. So remember, this is the index.js file. This is this guy over here where we want to write our JSX. Once you do that, now this should actually work. So if it works, then we shouldn't get an error. Okay, now it's possible that you might be getting an error like this. Now you see I'm getting this error down here. And so what this is we're just having trouble loading this file, and there's actually a reason why this is happening. Basically, it's because we're sort of running this from like the file server. So if you look up here, I have this URL here, which is like basically from my file server. When you do that, sometimes the browser has difficulty loading scripts. So if that is happening to you, and it's happening to me, if you're in VS Code, what you want to do is right click, and over here you could say open in default browser. Okay, so if you open in default browser like that from Visual Studio Code, now you'll see that we have this like local host thing up here. That means that we're sort of serving these files from our local file system. And now you'll see that we're not getting that error anymore. Now, if you don't have Visual Studio Code, there is another thing I would recommend using. And actually, we're only going to use this for like a couple more minutes because we're going to be using something called Create React App. But there's a program which is called HTTP Server, and that will allow you to do the same thing. Or you can check to see if your IDE has the ability to do that. But basically, we want to host these files from localhost, okay? All right, but once again, not super important if you don't get around to doing that. I'm just going to use this to explain these concepts really quick. Okay, so we've been talking about Babel, right? It's this transpiler, and over here we have this code, but instead we want to be able to write this code. So I want to be able to write this like my JSX element. Now let me show you, because we're using Babel now, I can actually comment this out, and instead of putting my first element in there, I can put my JSX element in there. And if I save, you'll see here that exactly the same thing pops up. And now, instead of having to modify this gross, ugly React code, now I can modify this JSX code, and everything sort of works out, right? Okay, so hopefully you're able to get that showing up over here. Like I said, if you're not, that's okay. In a couple minutes, we're gonna be moving on to something that everyone will be able to use. But for now, that's hopefully kind of a good idea of how Babel works. So one of the cool things then when we're using this JSX, right, when the JSX gets transpiled by Babel and then gets executed here in the browser, one of the cool things we can do is we can do JavaScript interpolation, right? And this is one of the most controversial parts about React, especially when it first came out. Like I remember when I was learning React in like 2014, a lot of people were like skeptical about it because of JSX. And the idea is that JSX is all written in JavaScript. So React is entirely JavaScript. Like I said, there's basically nothing in this HTML file. And, you know, because of that, like some people were concerned that this was going to be weird, like no one had ever done it before. But nowadays, this has actually become like one of the standard ways of doing things. Okay, so when we're using JSX, we can use it just like HTML, except there's even better things that we can do with it. So we can actually do what's called interpolation. So we can interpolate JavaScript values into here. Okay, so for example, if I created a constant and we called it like my item, or why don't we call it like item, yeah, we'll call it my item. And I set this equal to, let's say this is like item 3. If I can type. So then down here, okay, we can create another list item. And in here, instead of putting just like this text item 1 or item 2, instead I'm going to put an open and close curly bracket. And then inside of this open and close curly bracket, I'm going to put the name of the variable. And so check it out. What's going to happen now is when we refresh the page over here, you'll see that we have item 1, item 2, and item 3, except we pulled item 3 out of a JavaScript variable. So this is like a constant, and we were able to pull this out of it. So, you know, I could change this to like my name or something, and you can see that it does that. So this is one of the cool things about JSX, is that instead of like what we were doing before where we have to like get access to, our button or whatever, and then I have to change the inner text and I have to do all that stuff, right, to connect them, React has one seamless way of doing this for us. So we can define all of our user interfaces in JSX, and then we can just interpolate stuff in, right? So I could interpolate this into, what is this, my item? I can interpolate this over here as well, right? I can put this wherever I want. You can also use JavaScript functions. So I could say like my item, this is a string, dot to uppercase, and this will uppercase it, right? So I could do all sorts of stuff with this, right? Whatever you can do in normal JavaScript, you can do here in JSX. But once again, just to kind of wrap up this Babel section, is I want to make the point that this JSX is not valid JavaScript. This is not something that a browser is going to be able to interpret by default. You have to pass it through a transpiler. So whenever this code is executed, before this is actually run on the browser, Babel is going to, and where did we have that set up? Babel is going to convert it into this JavaScript code, which we're able to execute without it. Okay, 99.999% of times you're going to be using JSX when you're doing JavaScript. You'll almost never do this just because it's not scalable and it's not something that is very easy to read. Okay, cool. So that kind of wraps up our talk about JSX. Now, one final point that I'll make is that JSX is not identical to HTML, okay? There are a little bit of differences. It's about, I would say, 90% the same. You can do all the same stuff, but there are some little differences, which we'll get into a bit later. But that hopefully kind of gives you an idea of how JSX works. Now, the next big concept we want to get into is this idea of a component. So right over here, what we've done is we've created essentially a JSX element. So we've created like a React element. And that's why we have, we can do the same thing using React.createElement, right? We can do that same thing. And so these are elements, right? These are, things that can show up over there on the browser, and that's what React does really well. So we create the elements in React, and then React DOM is able to render them into the browser. But generally when we're working in React, we're not going to just be creating these elements. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to create components. So there's these two separate things, elements and components. And a component is essentially just like a little container that has elements inside of it. And the reason we want to use components, well, there's a couple of different reasons, but the main one is for reusability. So if I create a Java or a React component, I can actually use it in multiple places throughout my app. And it just makes your code a lot more readable and also a lot easier to maintain and write. Now, components in React are very simple, okay? At its most simple, it is a JavaScript function which returns a React element. Okay, so it's basically a JavaScript function which returns JSX. That's kind of the main definition that you would need to know. So what I could do is instead of creating this my JSX element, I could actually create a component. And so like I said, it's just going to be a function. So I'm going to create a function called app. And this is just going to be equal to an arrow function. Now, I like using this arrow function syntax. That's what I'm going to be using. But you could also you could say like function app, same exact thing. There's a million ways you could do this. But this is what I prefer to do. And so, like I said, a component is just a function which returns JSX. And then there's some other crazy stuff we can do in it as well. But that's all you kind of need to know for now. So what I want to do then is I want to take this and we will cut it, and I'm just going to return it from here. And generally with the JSX, you want to put parentheses around it just to keep it nice and clean. Okay, so, and why don't we move this constant here into this function as well. Now, if you know a lot about JavaScript, one of the benefits of having these functions is that we can take advantage of things like closures, and there's also, we can pass in parameters into here. So there's a lot of benefits to using these functions. But this is basically it, right? So this is our React component. Now, there is another way to create components, which is using classes. Now, this is a more, I guess, like legacy way of doing things. I'm not going to be covering it in this tutorial just because it's not really the future of React, but there is another way. You'll hear people talk about class components. They'll do something like this, where they'll say like class app extends React component. There's all sorts of stuff like that. Okay, for now, let's just focus on the functions and we'll get used to kind of the core concepts. So this is our component. It is a function which returns JSX. And now instead of putting my JSX element into here, we can actually put our component. Now, the way that we're going to want to render this, or the way that we're going to want to write this, is we're going to want to write it just like we would an HTML tag. So I'm going to put app just like that. And this is sort of our component tag, I guess is what we would call it. And so this component tag, and once again, this isn't like standard JavaScript. This is something that Babel is going to have to take care of for us. But this will tell the React DOM that, okay, we want to essentially render this out. So let's go over here and we'll refresh. And this isn't working. Oh no, okay, sorry, I was on the wrong browser tab. Okay, so now you can see that we have exactly the same stuff. And if I was to, you know, modify this at all, then this should show up over here. Perfect. Okay, so what React is doing is whenever we see this, right? So whenever I see app sort of laid out like this in this tag format, React is going to go through and it'll execute the code in this function, and then whatever gets returned from the function, so whatever JSX, that's what's going to get rendered out with React DOM. Okay, so React DOM will render that out. But this is the idea, right? So we have this function, and then this is basically equivalent to us calling the function. So actually, instead of just saying app like that, you could actually just say app like this, and I'm pretty sure it'll do the same thing. Yeah, so it still works. So this is also just another way of doing that. Okay, so it's just calling that function basically. And this syntax is better because it's more of like a JSX syntax, and you'll see why that's useful a little bit later on. Okay, but we execute this function, whatever gets returned from it, that's the JSX, and that's what's going to get rendered over here onto the browser. Perfect. Okay, so this really is when we're getting into some real React now. Okay, so now that we have this stuff laid out, I think we've kind of worked our way up into how React works. Okay, and I think one of the things I've liked about doing this is that I've been able to walk you through step by step. So we've started from vanilla JavaScript, right? Where we're doing document.getElementById, we're adding event listeners, we're doing all of that. And then we started moving into, okay, let's start using React DOM. And now I think we're at a point where this is how most React code is written, okay? Where we have these different components and they return JSX, and then we render them out using React DOM. Okay, this is like very standard stuff. What I want to do now is move us into a environment that is better for writing React code. So this environment works, and I can create all this React code that I need to create, and that's fine. But when you're writing serious applications with React, you're gonna want to do something else. In other words, we're gonna want some more tooling around writing this code. And the best way to do this, the best way to like scaffold out and build a React project is using something called Create React App. I have this up here somewhere. Yeah, so here it is. So there's this website. Now this is it's like a package, it's an NPM package, but this is created by the React team. So this is like official, I think it was created by the React team. But this is basically like a starter template for your React project. And so what it'll do is it'll set all this up, right? So it'll set up this index.html file, it'll add all these scripts, it'll actually do that using NPM, which we'll talk about. It'll add in Babel, and you know, like I said before, how we had that problem with Babel where we needed to like run it on a local host server. It'll set all that up for us. So this is gonna be really easy. And generally you don't wanna, well, I shouldn't say that, but I would say if you're just starting out, or even if you're working at a big company, using Create React App is like, everyone's gonna know how to use it. This is like industry standard, so it's definitely a good idea. Okay, so we run this Create React App tool and it'll like generate this whole project for us, and that's where we're gonna continue on with our coding from now on, just because it's a better environment. So I'm gonna show you how to set that up. So you wanna go to Create React App, you can just Google it. I think you just Google Create React App, this should pop up. This is actually part of Node.js though. Okay, so you're gonna need to have Node.js installed on your computer. And if you just Google like how to install Node.js, like there's a million tutorials. I don't know that that's like worth my time going over right now. But you're gonna need to have Node.js set up on your computer. And you're also gonna need to have access to a terminal. So if you're on Windows, you can use like the command prompt, or if you're on Mac, there's like the terminal application. If you're in Visual Studio Code, if you hit, if you come up here to terminal and you type in, or you just go to new window, this will open up like a terminal window. But if you're on Mac, you can also just go to terminal, or you can go to command prompt on Windows. Okay, but we're going to need this, and you're going to need it to be open to the folder where you want to create the React app. Okay. All right, so hopefully that's clear. I don't want to spend too much time just like talking about setting this up, because this has been done a million times. So you can always just Google it. But once you have npm, so you can check to see if you have npm by typing npm-v. So I have like version 6.14, it doesn't really matter. And then you want to install create React app. So you can just type npm i-g create React app, okay? And what that'll do is it'll go out and it'll install this npm package that we can then use. So create React app will like run and like generate all this stuff for us, okay? So you want to make sure that you're inside of the folder where we've been doing all this stuff, or if you want to create a new folder, that's fine. But I'm going to do it from inside of here. So I'm actually going to copy, why don't we copy just this app component right here? Okay, so I'm going to, or let's do this. Why don't we copy all of this code? So we're going to copy everything that's in index.js. So make sure you copy that, and then I'm going to delete these two files. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to run the create React app program. Now, assuming it's been installed correctly, and like I said, there's tons of guides on how to do this. You can just type in create React app, and then you could put the name of the folder or the name of a folder where you want to create the project in. Now, so you could put like, React project or something like that. In my case, I want to do this in this same intro to React folder. So I'm just going to put a dot here. Okay. And this is going to go off and run. Now, this might take a few minutes, especially if it's like your first time doing it. But you'll see over here, like as this runs, all of these different like files are going to start to get added into here. And the Create React App project is a Node.js project. So if you have experience with Node.js, then you're going to feel right at home in this environment. If you've never used Node.js before, this might be a little bit intimidating. Now, to use React, you don't really need to know a lot about Node.js. I'm going to show you everything that you need to know. So don't feel like you have to go learn all of Node.js or anything like that. And actually, maybe I'll make a video about it in the future. But Node.js allows us to run JavaScript outside of a browser. And so Create React App uses JavaScript to kind of like package our React up together. And like there's all these cool scripts that will help us develop in React. Okay, so all that's going to be in here. But remember, everything that I've gone through so far is like the core concept. So you guys have seen step by step basically how React gets added to a website. So I don't want you to get too intimidated about all of this stuff just yet. Okay, but I will walk you through some of the stuff that's in here. So this node modules folder, try not to open it. This is a massive folder. You're going to be scrolling forever. Just leave that alone. The public folder, this has a bunch of files in it by default. We'll talk about some of those in a second. And then the source folder has a bunch of code as well. Then there's some of these other files down here as well. We're going to be doing 99% of our work in the source folder, so you don't even really need to worry about any of these other ones. But before we move on, let me just show you how to run this. So there's this package.json file. And over here, there's this scripts section. And this basically has a list of all these different scripts that we can use to help us develop an app. So down here in your terminal, what you'd want to do is type in Npm Run Start. And this Npm Run is basically me saying, hey, Npm, that stands for Node Package Manager. This is basically just like allowing us to run some JavaScript code in the background. I want you to run the start script. So over here. So this is like a program that Create React App gives us that'll allow us to start our app. So you remember before how I was saying like you might need to start this on like localhost or something because there's all these weird like CORS things. This is like gonna allow us to fix that. So if you run Npm Run Start, it should open up in your browser over here, and you'll see that there's a bunch of code that's already written. So when you scaffold out a Create React App, it will give you all of this stuff by default. What we're gonna do is just gonna delete pretty much everything that's in here, okay? So delete everything except index.js. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that right now. Let's just delete all of these. And you might wanna stop this. So you can hit Control-C on your terminal, and that'll terminate the program down here. So in the source folder, we're deleting everything except index.js. Okay, so we can delete this. Bye-bye. Okay, so now in the source folder, we just have index.js, and I'm gonna delete everything that's in here, and I'm gonna paste in the code that we had before. So this is the exact code that we were writing before. Hopefully we understand this, right? We've discussed all of it. And you'll notice that we're getting an error. So it says React DOM is not defined. Okay, so now that we're working in this, we call this like a node environment. This is NPM. We're gonna need to import some of these different libraries that we're using. So remember before how we just included those React and those React DOM scripts, and then they just automatically showed up. So we could just say like react.createElement, we could say react dom.render. Now that we're in this new environment, those aren't gonna just show up. So, and if you know JavaScript, like this should make sense, but I don't know like what level everyone's at. But up here, we're gonna say import React from React, okay? And then we're gonna say import React DOM from React DOM. So these are actually the names of like NPM packages. And if you look in your package.json folder, those should be in the dependencies. Now, once again, I don't want you to get intimidated about all this stuff. If you've never used Node.js, that's fine. Don't get intimidated. Just follow along with what I'm doing. It's all good. You'll still learn React. Okay, so we just changed that. Okay, and now we're not getting any errors anymore. So this is looking pretty good. But if you remember before, there was two parts to this. We had the index.html file, and then we had our index.js file. So here's our index.js file. This is looking good to me. I don't see any problems in here. It's almost identical to what we had before, except for these imports. Now, where's the index.html file? That is gonna be in the public folder. So this public folder is gonna have, just like it could have assets in it, like this icon file. It could have like images in it. It could have a manifest file, whatever this is, right? But over here, we have this index.js file, or sorry, index.html file. And if we take a look at this, there's obviously like more stuff in here than we had before, but take a look down here and you'll see our little old friend, the root div. This is exactly what we had before, right? This div ID equal to root. So Create React App is giving that to us. We don't have to set that up anymore. Okay, so inside the public folder, that's where that's gonna be. And then inside of here, we can still grab that just like anything else. Now, obviously this might not be a structure that you're used to, like what is this public folder? What's the source folder? It's just the convention that Create React App uses. So it's just something that you're gonna need to get comfortable with. But what you need to know is that behind the scenes, there's all sorts of like processing, post-processing. There's like all this building stuff that's going on. So Create React App, like when we run that start script like we did before, it's gonna like take all this stuff and minify it, compile it, put it into just a really like efficient format. So we don't have to worry about that at all. All we have to do is just write JavaScript. Okay, so we have our index.html with our root elements. And then over here in the source folder, we have this index.js file. And this is exactly what we wrote before. So let's see if it works. Okay. So once again, I'm coming down here to my terminal. I'm gonna say Npm Run Start. And let's run this. Okay, so this might take a second to load up, but then it'll load this over here. And you'll see that we have the exact same thing as we had before. Cool. So we're kind of right back to where we were. Another thing I want you to notice is that we didn't have to like include any of that Babel stuff up here. Create React App is handling all of that. Okay, this is a really like efficient, good process where it'll transpile it with the Babel. It'll also do some other stuff like minification and all that. But that's okay. So there we go. All right. So now this is the environment where you want to be writing most of your React code. I've worked on a ton of different React code bases in the industry, just personally. Honestly, a lot of them are using this exact same setup. So if you can get comfortable in this environment, this Create React App environment, this is probably very similar to what the company you want to work for is using or what that open source project is using. Okay, this is the industry standard. And so now that we have this in here, I want to start getting into some more complex topics with React. Okay, we're going to start talking about how we can start reusing components, how we can start, putting components in their own files, all sorts of stuff like that. Before we do that though, I want to show you how we would sort of structure a React project, maybe by example. Now this is going to depend on what project you're working on, but this is kind of my preferred way of structuring React projects. And I've been a React developer for a long time, so it's a decent way to do it. Let's just say that. So what I want to do is I actually want to take this app component and I want to put it into its own file. So when we're talking about React, we always want to put things in their own files. We always want to separate things out as much as possible because then it's easier to maintain the code. So here in the source folder, and like I said, this is where we're doing 90% of the stuff. Here in the source folder, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call this components. Okay, and then inside of this components folder, I'm going to make a new file called app.js. Now inside of this app.js, I'm going to put all of the code that's over here. So I'm going to take this, I'll paste it into here. And anytime you're working in React, if you're doing something like this, we need to add two things onto here. So first thing we need to do is we need to import React. You need to import React because this is JSX code and this is something that React's going to be interacting with. And so we're going to want to have that in there. Another thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to say export default app. And what this does is this basically makes it so that this app code is going to be available to other files in our source folder. So inside of our components folder, we have this app.js file and we're importing React and then we're exporting default app. Okay. Once you've done that, now inside of index.js, okay, we want to import this. So I'm going to say import app from, and then you're going to say /components/app. And you don't need to put app.js on the end. You can just put app. So when I put this line of code in here, what this is doing is it's going to import all of the code from this file that got exported. So we're exporting this app function, which means that app right here is going to be essentially that function. Okay. Now we could actually just like console log that out just so you can see that it's working. And when we refresh this page, nothing should change. It should be exactly the same. You can see here we're printing out this, this function. And actually, if you look here, this code has all been like, transpiled by Babel and stuff like that. I don't know how to get this to go away. Like that. Okay, good. We need to go to the console. Okay, so like all this code has been kind of like transpiled by Babel. Obviously, it's like very messy. But that whole process has happened in the background, okay? And so now when we want to work on app, all we have to do is come over here and, we could change stuff up and it should get updated over here. Another cool thing about Create React App is you don't have to refresh the page anymore. So if I just like type like this and then I save the file, I'm not going to refresh the web browser and it's going to update. So once again, it's just a better environment to kind of work in. All right. So now that we've kind of looked at how we might set this up, let's talk about reusing components. And we're going to talk about building components that can be reused. So inside of the index.js file, really all you should have is just this code. And actually what a lot of people will do is they won't even have this. They'll just put that in there. But this is just about all we should have in here. So you shouldn't have to touch index.js anymore. All you want to do is just work with this app.js. Okay. Now, here's the thing about React. It's very similar to HTML. Or I shouldn't say React. Here's the thing about this like JSX component stuff. It's very similar to HTML. So if I'm in like an HTML document like this one over here, for example, I might have a div, maybe this has an ID of like wrapper, and then I would put all of the rest of the code for my entire website inside of here. Okay. Another good example of that is the body, right? So these body tags, all of the code for the whole application, like the whole website, is going to go inside the body tags. That's sort of like the big wrapper tag that wraps everything around. That's what this app.js component is going to do for us. So the app.js component, this is going to be like the body. This is going to be like the wrapper where we're going to put all the rest of our code, all the rest of our JSX inside of. Okay, so that's what this is going to be. And so now all of the JSX that we write, all the rest of the components, all the rest of the stuff that we do is going to be contained inside of this app component. And I'm going to show you how we can like build other components and do stuff like that. Okay. And so now that we're back in this nice little React environment, now that we've learned a little bit about JSX, our goal is to build that counter, right? That's what we were doing from the beginning. So we looked at how to do it in vanilla JS. Now I want to do it in React. And the way that we're going to do this in React is we're going to create a component for it. So we're going to create a custom component just for this little button counter. Okay, so we want to create a React component, which is specifically for this button. And I'm going to do this very similar to the way that I did app.js. So over here in my components folder, I'm going to create a new file. And why don't we call this countButton.js? Okay, so this count button, once again, you click the button, it increments, and we'll look at how we do this instead of using vanilla JavaScript with actual React JavaScript. So once again, we want to import React from React. This is always going to take place. Then we're going to create our component. So remember, the component's just a function. This is just a function that executes and returns JSX, returns React elements, something like that. And over here, we're going to call this count button. Now, whenever we're naming these React components, and you've seen me do this with the app component, we always want to name them with capital letters. So generally in JavaScript, we start variable names off with lowercase letters, and then we kind of do like whatever they call it, camel case from there on, where like each new word has an uppercase letter. In this case, it's all uppercase. Okay, so I'm going to set this equal to this little arrow function. Now, once again, you can do this using normal functions. It doesn't matter. So you could do this. Totally fine. Same exact thing. But I prefer doing it this way. And then we're going to export default the count button. Now, remember, all these components need to return JSX. So that's the last thing that we need to do. And why don't we just put a div in here that says hello world. Okay. So this is like the simplest component that we can have. It's in its own file. We're exporting it. We're importing React. This is looking good. Now what we want to do is we want to import this into app.js. So like I was just talking about, app.js is this wrapper. And so anything that we create now is going to go, it's going to get sort of rendered inside of here. Okay. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a div just like this. And then inside of this div, we're going to put that count button. And we can get rid of that too. So I want to import this because I want to be able to use it. So all the code for the count button is stored here in countButton.js. It's all stored in that file. I want to take this code and I want to basically put it here into this app. I want to render it inside of the app component. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say import count button from count button. And actually we can say /count button. So just like that. And now I'm going to render this out just like I rendered out the app component. Okay. So over here, I'm going to make, and this is an app.js, I'm going to make a less than sign. I'm going to say count button, and then I'm going to make a / and a greater than sign. And so you could also render this out like this. That's fine. So this is like a, sort of like a traditional HTML element. We're not going to do that in this specific case, and we can talk about why a little bit later. But for now, we're just going to do it like this. And this is what we would call like a standalone component. Basically, there's not other components inside of it. So if I do this with the count button over here, and you'll see that the browser's already updated. And so here in the app component, right, I can have like, this is in the app component, right? This is in the app component. And the hello world, or this count button, right? That's the code that was in here. Maybe we can just change this to count button. That's sort of sandwiched in between all of this stuff that's already in this app component, right? So we can put stuff over here and then we can like sandwich in the count button right there. Okay, so now that the count button is kind of like in its own component, it's in its own little separate space, this is when we can start working on it. And once again, always a good idea to break all these things up. I want to create my own file for each of the components generally that I have in my app. Okay, so as a general rule, for each new component that you create, it should be in its own file. And it's just because it's just easier to maintain that way. A lot of production React code bases, like for big companies, there'll be thousands of components. And so it's very important that we're organized. All right, so let's get rid of these. And hopefully now you see how this is all connected, right? So the react-dom.render renders out our app, okay? And then inside of the app, we're able to render out this count button. And this is all through JSX. So once again, this isn't something that you could do with HTML. You have to do this with JSX, but it becomes really easy to do. Okay, so over here in our count button component now, we want to start wiring it up so that we can click on that button and then the count will get incremented. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we'll do is we'll have this div right here. Now, whenever you're creating like JSX little components like this, you should always have like surrounding tags like this. So you should always have like a div or a span or something. I always like to have a div. And then in here, we're actually going to create that same stuff that we did before. So we're going to create our button, and this is going to say +1. And then over here, we're going to create another div, and this is just going to be like 0, for example. Okay, so this is very similar to what we had before, and we can click on this +1, and we want the 0 to update. If you remember though, when we were doing this in vanilla JavaScript, when we were doing this with the DOM APIs, we had a piece of state. And let's see if you can remember what that piece of state is. See if you can remember it. The piece of state was the current count, right? So I had a variable, like we can put it up here, called current count, and that was initially equal to 0. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to display the current count out onto the browser. That was like our whole mission, right? We had this piece of state, and the piece of state was a value that is going to get displayed on the user interface, a value that when it gets updated, we want the user interface to get updated. And I sort of displayed that. And so what we can do is we can use that interpolation that we talked about earlier in order to display the current count. So I could say current count right here. And now check this out. If I change the current count like to 10, it updates over here automatically. So React is automatically linking these two things up together using the JSX. And that's why this is so powerful. It's because I can have this variable over here called current count, and then I can just directly display it inside of my JSX or inside of the HTML, which is where it's eventually going to go, without any extra steps. So I can just create this variable, I can put it over here, and then it gets displayed. And so anytime I increment the current count, for example, like I put it up to 11, or if I put it up to 12, then it gets updated over there on the browser. And so it just takes all of this extra work out of the process, right? Because now the JavaScript and the HTML, the JSX, are super, super tightly linked. So we can use the data that we're storing inside of our JavaScript to inform the views that we create in JSX. So now the question becomes, how do we increment this? How do we make it so that when I click on that button, that not only does the current count update, but it also updates over here on the browser? Well, let's take a look. If you remember in the vanilla JavaScript example, we attached an event listener onto the button, right? So whenever the button got clicked, we executed some code. Specifically, we like updated the count and then updated it over here. In React, it's a very similar process, except once again, extremely streamlined. So over here on this button tag, we can actually just say on click. And then you're going to say an equal sign and an open and closed curly bracket. Now, inside of this open and closed curly bracket, we can put a function which is going to get executed whenever this button gets clicked. So I could put, for example, an arrow function in here, right? So if you see here, this is our arrow function, everything that's highlighted. And then in here, I could say console.log, or why don't we do an alert, just because it's easier to see. So we could say alert clicked, okay? So we have our button, and then this is this on-click attribute. We also call these props, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And we say on-click is equal to, and then inside of this open and close curly bracket, we put an arrow function, or just any kind of function, right? And so now over here, when I click on this button, you'll see that we get the alert popping up. And so once again, I don't need to attach an event listener. I don't need to like do all this crazy stuff where I'm linking the HTML and the JavaScript. It's all JavaScript. It's all just one thing, which makes this really useful. So you can do this with arrow functions, and this is pretty common. But another thing we could do is just create another function up here. So I could say handle click, and I'm going to set this equal to an arrow function, just like that. And so instead of putting this whole thing in here, inside of these curly brackets, I'm just going to put the name of that function. This is another really common thing that developers do. Okay, so onClick is equal to, inside of these curly brackets, you're going to put handle click. And then this function will get executed. So let's click on this, and now it's working. Okay, so this is how we do like event listeners in JSX and in React. So you could say on click, you could say like, you can see all of them are showing up here, on abort, on cut, on double click, on drag start, on drop, all these browser events. Basically anything that the user can do on the browser, you can listen for it and respond to it doing something just like this. So you could put multiple ones of these on too. So you could say like on mouse down, we're doing something, or on mouse over, whatever. So we call this a prop or an attribute. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but that's really what we're doing here. Okay, so I'm passing in this function. Now, whenever I click on this, this function gets executed. And so what we want to do is we want to update the count. So we want to update, whenever this gets clicked, we want to update the current count. And let's put this back to 0. We want to update this so that instead of being 0, it's 1, or instead of being 1, it's 2, right? We just continually increment it. Now let's see if we can do this. This might not be as straightforward as you think. So I'm gonna try to just do it like this. I'm gonna say current count plus plus. Now let's see if this worked. So when we did the vanilla JavaScript stuff before, this worked. All we had to do was increment it, and then we actually had to, what did we do? We said like we said display count dot inner text is equal to current count, right? So we did something like that. So in React, believe it or not, this isn't actually going to work. So if I come over here and I refresh the page, let's see what happens. So I'm going to click on this +1, and whoops, this should be a let. My bad. So that was another error. Okay, so if we refresh the page and then we click on this +1, you'll see that nothing is happening. So why isn't anything happening? What's going on here? Because if you think about this, like this should be working, right? Down here, I'm displaying the current count. And then whenever I click on this, I'm updating it. So why is this 0 not updating? Well, there's two possibilities. One possibility is that this code isn't working. So one possibility is that we're not actually incrementing the current count. Let's see if that's the case. So I'm going to come over here and I'll say current count. So we're going to print this out, and let's open up our console. And now if I click on this +1, it's showing us the current count. So you'll actually see that this current count variable is updating, right? This is incrementing. I'm able to click on this, and this is going from 1 to 16 or whatever we're doing, right? So it's continually getting incremented. What we need to do in React, though, is we need to tell React that we want to update the user interface. So here's the thing about React. React only wants to update the DOM. It only wants to update what the user is seeing. It only wants to do that when it absolutely needs to. It's because this is a very expensive operation. This is something that takes a lot of time, and it's something that takes a lot of, like, in certain cases, computing power, depending on how much you're displaying. And so React only wants to do this when it's absolutely necessary, okay? And so that means that even though we're incrementing the current count, and even though it's working, React isn't updating the DOM. React isn't updating the user interface. It's only going to do that when we explicitly tell it to, okay? And the way that we can tell React to do that is by using what's called a React hook. Okay, so this is the first time I'm talking about React hooks, and this is actually a big subject, okay? And if you've done anything with React before, you've probably heard people talking about hooks. Hooks are ways that you can tell React what's going on in your program, or ways that you can respond to things that are happening in the program, okay? So these hooks allow us to tell React, hey, I updated the current count. I want you to update it on the browser, okay? Now there's a bunch of these different hooks. The hook that's gonna allow us to do that, though, is called useState. So like I said before, this current count, this is a piece of state in our application. This is a value that is directly linked up to the user interface, right? So the current count, this is something that can affect the actual state of our application, right? It's what the current count is. And so whenever we have pieces of state like this, we need to use this React hook. And like I said, the reason we need to use this, it's called useState, which is this hook, is because we need to be able to tell React, hey, this is a piece of state, and whenever I update this, I need you to update the browser as well. We can't do that with just normal variables right here. And so what we want to do is we need to import this useState hook. So up here next to this React, you're going to put a comma and then an open and close curly bracket, and you're just going to put useState in here. So this is something that's included with the React library by default. React is giving this to us, so we can use it. And now what we want to do is we want to use state to create the current count variable. There's going to be a little bit of weird syntax here. I just need you to stick with me, okay? When you use useState, there's like this weird way that we need to do it. But as long as you just follow along with what I'm doing, I'll try to explain it as best I can. So I'm actually going to make this a const again. So we'll make this a constant. And then I'm going to surround this in an open and closed, what do we call that? Square bracket. And then I'm going to put current count, and I'm going to put set current count. So over here on the right side of the equal sign, I'm going to put useState. And then in here, I'm just going to put a 0. So this is obviously like pretty complex. I realize that. Maybe we can break down exactly what's happening. So I'm going to comment that out real quick. And before I do anything else, actually, wait, let's put this current count back. I probably should have done this in a different order, just so we don't get errors. But I want to console log out the result of calling useState. So this is a React hook. So this is a function that React gives us. It's going to allow us to manage the state in our application. If I was to call this function, let's see what value we get back. So you'll see here that we get back an array. So this right here is the result of calling useState. We get an array back. The element at index position 0 is just a 0, and this over here is a function. So we call useState, and we get two values back that are stored inside of an array. The first is the actual state variable that we're going to use. So let me let's go back to this, and we'll see what's going on here. So these two values, the current count and set current count, these are going to get stored in there. So this 0 is going to get stored inside of current count, and this function is going to get stored inside of set current count. So index position 0, this 0 right here, this is the current count itself. So this is the value that we can use down here in our JSX. Set current count is a function which we can use to tell React to update the current count. I realize this is a little bit confusing. I think as we go through this a little bit more, hopefully you'll start to see what's going on. But I just wanted to explain a little bit about this funky syntax. So we're getting an array back, and this syntax right here allows us to store index position 0 in the current count and index position 1 in here, which is the state and a function. Okay, that's enough. Don't worry too much if you didn't understand that. I just wanted to give an explanation. And so down here, the first thing that we changed is instead of just saying let current count is equal to 0, now what we've done is we've created this current count variable by calling useState. So now this is sort of like registered in React as like a piece of state. So if we just do this, like if I just say current count, as far as React is concerned, this is just another variable. This has nothing to do with the state of our application. This is just kind of like this random variable that we created. When I do it like this, we're basically registering current count with React. So now we're saying, hey, React, current count is a piece of state that I want to be able to keep track of in my application. And that's what we're doing right here. Okay, so all I have to do now, if I want to update the state, is I can call this set current count function. So down here, instead of doing this whole ++ thing and current, console.log, whatever, I can just say set current count. This is a function that I can call, and in here I want to pass in what I want the new value to be. So initially this is going to start off at 0. That's what this means over here. And so what I want to do is I just want to say current count +1. So I'm setting the current count now equal to whatever the current count is +1, and I'm doing that whenever the user clicks the button. Okay, and so now because we've like registered this piece of state with React, React has given us this piece of state that we should use, current count, and it's given us a way to update that piece of state, which is set current count. So let's save this. We'll come over here and let's refresh. And now when I click this, you'll see that this is getting incremented. Okay, so let's walk through one more time what's going on. Okay, the button down here, when it gets clicked, we call handle click. And whenever this gets called, we set the current count equal to the current count +1. This is a little bit of a funky syntax. Just know that that's how you need to use it, okay? Now, once again, I said this before, but this 0 over here, this is gonna be like the default value that we're gonna use. So let's clear this out. And if I was to put like 100 in here, for example, and I save it, now you'll see that the default value of current count is 100. So you can put anything you want in here. Like I could put 800 in here and it'll show up like that. So this is like the default value. It's probably a good idea to just like start it at 0. But hopefully you can kind of see like how that works. So now we've handled the click, we've updated the state. This is a very, very common thing to do in React. But I want to just show you a little bit more about how this works internally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a console.log here, and I'm going to say components rendered, okay? So basically this line of code is inside of our count button function, and I want to show you like how this is executing, right? So I'm just gonna refresh the page, and you'll see that initially when the component gets rendered out onto the browser, when React DOM like renders this thing out so the user can see it, this function gets executed, right? So this line of code in here gets executed. If I click on this +1 though, check it out. This gets printed out again, right? So every time that the state updates, so every time that we call, for example, current count, set current count, every time I update the state, this whole function is gonna get executed again and will re-render all of this stuff with the new current count value. So when I click on this +1, and you can see here that that 2 just means that it got run again. When I click on the +1, React executes this function again, except this time it does it with the new current count. And then down here, when we re-render all of this, we're re-rendering it with the new current count, with the updated count. So obviously, like, doing state in React is not as simple as you might think. It actually used to be more difficult than this, believe it or not, in the class components. But this is how you do it. So once again, I know it's a little intimidating like this syntax up here, but just understand that whenever you want to create a piece of state in your React application, you want to do it like this. So you need to import use state, okay? And then you need to use this funky little array syntax. We call this is called like destructuring an array, if you want to look that up. And so the actual piece of state, like the actual value, gets stored in this current count variable, and then this is a method that we can use to update it. And so then whenever we click on this, we call set current count, and then we're able to update it with the new value. So this could be a number. You can store a string in here. You can really store anything that you want in there, any sort of data type. It doesn't matter. You can store Booleans, whatever. But numbers is a pretty good use case, I think. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of like what's going on here, right? We create this component. All it wants to do is return this JSX, and sometimes we have these special values called state values, which we want to update, or which we want to use to update the user interface, right? So whenever the count updates, we want the user interface to update. Cool. Now, we've seen how to make one count button. The big problem with our vanilla JavaScript approach was that it was very difficult to reuse these things. If you remember back to the beginning of the video, right, we created these buttons and I basically had to copy and paste all the code to be able to reuse it, or to be able to kind of make a second counter, right? When we're using React, this is like so easy, it's insane. So over here, I'm in the app.js file, right? We're rendering out the count button. If I want to duplicate this, like if I want to reuse this and use another counter, all I have to do is just like copy this, paste it down here. Now check this out. Boom, we got another counter. And these are independent of each other. So I can click this one separate from this one. So I could create like 50 of these counters. I mean, if I really wanted to, right? And then over here, you can see, boom, we have all these different counters. They can all be used independently, and we could use these in different parts of our app. So a lot of times with React, you'll create components like this that are used all around. So let's say you're creating a website, maybe you'll create like a search bar, and maybe you want to use that in like 20 different places in your app. Well, you can use the same component. Now, the cool thing about these components is that if I want to change the way that this works, I only have to change it in one place. So let's say that I want to make it so that instead of incrementing by 1, I want this to increment by 5. Check this out. I just changed this one little line of code right here, and now both of these are going to be incrementing by 5. So I changed the code in one place and it updates throughout the entire application. And that's really where like React is really powerful, okay? It's this reusability, but it goes a level deeper, okay? This can actually get way more customizable, way more powerful, and we're going to do that with something called props. Now, a prop is a value that's going to get passed into the component, which is going to tell it some well, how do I say this? It's going to inform some aspect of what it does, okay? So the example that I just had right here, instead of incrementing by 1, I incremented by 5. But let's say that I wanted to make it so this counter could be incremented by any value. So I could say, hey, counter, instead of incrementing by 1, I want you to increment by 5. But I have this other counter over here, and I want that one to increment by 10. How do we do that? In other words, I want to be able to specify when I render this count button, I want to be able to specify like what it should increment by. Should it increment by 5, 10, 30, a million, whatever? Maybe I want to be able to specify that here. So this count should be able to increment by 5, and this one should increment by 10 or something like that. The way we can do that, like I said, is with these things called props. So a prop is a value that you pass into a component, which the component will use to inform what it does. So let me show you how we can set this up right here. Now, over here on the count button page, remember, this is just a function. It's just a normal JavaScript function that returns JSX. By default, when React executes this function, React is going to pass in an object which is called props. And it's going to pass that in as the first argument. So I can come over here and I can specify an argument for this function, which is called props. Now let's take a look at what this is. So I'm just going to console log out props, and we'll open up the console and let me refresh. And you'll see over here that this is just an empty object. So this empty object is all the props that are being passed into this component. And once again, React's going to handle this all in the back end. Like, you don't have to worry about that. But these props are values that we could use inside of this component. So the question then is, how do we pass props into this? Well, I'll show you. So over here in app.js, I'm going to create a prop which is called Increment_by, and I'm going to pass it into here. And this is going to be exactly like this on-click thing. Okay? So over here I'm going to say, and this is just right here, like in between these little tags, you're going to say Increment_by, and these should be named just like JavaScript variables are named, okay? So there's no spaces or anything. And then you're going to say equals, open and close curly bracket, and in here I'm going to put a value. So why don't we put in here like a 1, and then Increment_by, over here we're going to put a 5, okay? So the first count button is going to take an Increment_by prop, which is 1. The second one's going to take an Increment_by prop, which is 5. I'm going to save this. Now let's see what gets printed out over here. So if we refresh, you'll see now that that props object, instead of being empty, it actually has this value in it. It has this Increment_by value. So this right here, this is the first count button, which has that increment value of 1. This is the second count button, which has an increment value of 5. So I've rendered the same component, but I've passed it a different value each time. So now over here, I could say, for example, props.increment_value, because this is just another object, so we can reference this. And now check this out. It'll just give me it's Increment_by, my bad. Increment_by, and it'll just give me those numbers. And so this is where props get really powerful, is we can use this Increment_by value in order to say like how much we should increment by over here. So instead of saying +5 or +1 or 2 or whatever, I'm going to say plus props.increment_by. So I'm actually going to use this value that we passed in over here in order to determine how much I should increment this count by. Okay, so we can get rid of this, and now I want to show you how this works. So let's refresh. And so this one should be added by 1, right? But this one is 5. So over here, now you'll see that this is adding by 5. And, we could do more of this, right? So we could create, maybe this one is like 7 or something. And so now we have 3 of these. All of them are incrementing by different things, right? But there is one extra problem. They all say +1, right? Even though this one's +5, this one's +7. So once again, why don't we use that prop? So we'll use props.increment_by. And instead of putting it up here, we'll also put it down here. So we'll say plus, and instead of saying +1, we're going to say plus props.increment_by. Now, the reason that I need these open and close curly brackets is because we're doing interpolation, right? So we talked about this with the JSX. Like, anytime you want to put just like a JavaScript variable value, you always need to put it inside of these curly brackets, okay? So that's props.increment_by. And we'll do it like that. And so now you'll see this one's +5, this one's +7. If I was to change this one to like 800, that's going to update over there, okay? And so these are props. These are values that get passed into a component by the component that's rendering it. So the app component, we would say, is rendering out the count button. And so when the app component renders out the count button, it can pass in this increment by value, tell it how much we want to increment by. Now, if you are going to be working with props, you need to make sure that they get passed in. So if I do this, you can see that we're getting this weird like not a number error, and it's because this is like passing in undefined. Okay, so we want to put this back. So you can define as many props as you want like on this, but you always need to make sure that you include them, okay? So those props get passed in here. We can use that to increment, and we can also use that as part of the JSX, like as part of the user interface. Cool. So that's the basics of props, and these are extremely useful, okay? Most components that you're going to be creating, especially if they have a lot of logic or if they're going to be reused a lot, they're going to have props. So that's how we make components more reusable, is we add in these different props to them. Now, I just want to make one quick note about the difference between props and state. So props are values that get passed into the component, right? So props are values where, you know, I'm in my app component right here. I want to render out this count button, and I can determine like what I want to increment it by. So maybe I have some weird use case where it needs to be incremented by 5. Well, then I can do that. Or if it's 800 for some reason, I can do that. So props are external values that get passed into the component. They're basically arguments that get passed in. State is a value that is, I guess, like internal to the component, right? So this piece of state, this is a value that the count button needs in order to do its job. But this, I guess technically it could come from somewhere else, but in this case, it comes internally, okay? And this is a value where when we update it, we want the user interface to update as well, okay? So that's kind of the difference between props and state. Maybe it's not super clear right now, but I think as we go on here, it'll start to become clearer. Okay, you can pass in one prop. You can also pass in multiple props, okay? So let's do another prop, and actually I want to talk about another concept in React, which is styling. So this is an area that has a lot of, I don't know if I want to say controversy, but there's a lot of different ways to style components in React. I'm not going to take a stance on like what I think the best way is. I just want to show you guys how to do some basic CSS styling stuff in React, and I'll also show you how to combine that with some of the props. So before we get into using this with props, I just want to show you generally how we would style a component, like in the most basic way in React, but remember there's plenty of different ways to do this. So now we're getting onto one of the big differences between HTML and JSX. So remember, this is JSX. This is inside of a JavaScript file. This is being used with React. HTML is just whatever's in an HTML file. There are a couple differences. Up until this point, we haven't really seen too many of them. But the first one here is with styling. Okay, so whenever we want to style a component, we need to pass in what's called a style object. Okay, now the style object is a JavaScript object which is going to define all of the different CSS attributes that we want to be applied to this. So let me just show you real quick how this might work. I'm going to create up here a constant which is called div style, and this is going to be an object. Okay, now over here I'm going to say this div is going to take some styles, and this is just like another prop that we can pass into the div. So we're going to say the style is equal to, and then whatever's inside of this curly bracket is going to be what the style is. So we can pass in div style. So div style is an object, and in here we could put CSS attributes. So for example, I could put like color, and this is all going to be an object syntax, and then I could put blue just like that. So now if I do this, you'll see that the text color has changed to blue. But notice that this isn't the way that we would do this in CSS. So if you know anything about CSS at all, which I'm assuming you do if you're trying to learn React, normally like in CSS, and I'll just do this in like a comment. How do I do comments? Jeez, I can't even remember. Okay, so normally you'd say like color blue. So we wouldn't need like these parentheses, we wouldn't need a comma here. But in JavaScript, this is an object. So we have the object key and we have like the object value. Now, most of these are going to be similar to the CSS one. So for example, like color, you can do that. We could say like border, and this needs to be in a string, 1 pixel, solid, black, something like that. So we can have a border around here as well. But anytime that you have an attribute that has like 2 names to it. So a good example is like border radius. So if I was writing border radius, I would write it like this. So maybe it's like 5 pixels or something. So we have this like dash in between the two of them. Anytime we're doing this in this object syntax up here, we need to make it, I guess, camel case. I don't know what the word for that is. So we would say border radius. Okay, just like that. And then we could put like 10 pixels or something like that. So now all of these are going to have 10 pixels, but you'll see that I had to put this inside of like a string, and we also had to have this capital R here. Now this all actually goes back to the way that the DOM, so we talked about the DOM all throughout this video. This goes back to the way that the DOM stores styles. So I'll just open up my browser real quick here. So remember we had like document, and this was the DOM thing. Well, we could say documents, and then if we like select an element, so we could say document dot, well actually see, I don't know. Okay, so we could say document dot, there's a way to do this. Let's grab like a div. So this will just grab like the first div. So we could say this dot style, and it's like this whole style object. This isn't really that important, but just know that this is kind of like what it's tied back to. So the DOM represents styles on all your HTML inside of this little style object, CSS style declaration object. That's where this is coming from. Again, not too important. I don't want you to get too bogged down with that. But whenever we're doing styles like this in JavaScript, if we want to create this style object, we need to do it like this. Okay, so that's going to get passed into div style, and that'll work the same way. You'll also see a lot of people do this like this. They won't have like a separate variable. And in this case, you'll notice that we need this like double curly bracket. So this is actually the styles, and then you need this outer curly bracket because that's just how we define props in React. So that's a little bit about how we can do styling. I want to put back some of this. Like I said, there's all sorts of ways to do that. Maybe I'll make a video about just React styling. I could talk for a couple hours about doing that. There's so much stuff there. But now let's bring this back into props. Okay, so we have one prop here for our count button, which is increment by, but I'll show you how we can do another thing with styling. So what I'd like to do now is I want to pass in a prop which is called button color. Now, when I pass in these props like this, I can make up the name. So I can call this whatever I want. There's really no rules aside from like it having to look like a JavaScript variable name. But we could pass in button color, and we could put in, like maybe this one's blue. We could pass in a button color over here and over here. Maybe this is red and then green. Now in our style, if we wanted to change the button color, we would attach a style object onto the button. So instead of attaching the styling onto the div, let's attach some styles onto the button. So I'm going to do it like that. And then why don't we call this button styles? So we can give this button a border radius of 10 pixels, and then we'll give it a background of blue. Whoops. And you can already see I'm messing this up. So now we can pass in the button styles onto the button, and it should have that different styling, right? So once again, the button, we have this style, and then we pass in the button styles, which I've defined up here. But instead of having the background be blue, I want to have the background be whatever got passed in here for the button color. Now this is going to get stored as one of the props once again. So if we console log out the props, and we'll open up our console, you can see here these are our props. So we had the button color is green, increment by 800. So there's 3 of these buttons, so we get 3 of these printouts. In here now, instead of using blue, I'm going to say props dot button color, or whatever I called this. Yeah, button color. Now check this out. All of these buttons are going to have different colors. So the first one is blue, right? Because I put blue in here. The second one is red, and the third one is green. All of these have different colors, but they all work exactly the same. So this is an example of how we can take styling and how we can use props to inform that styling. This is super common. Most people might not do it exactly this way, but this idea where you can pass in a prop which will determine the styling of something is pretty common in React, okay? And once again, that just goes right here in this button styles object. So you could configure this as much as you want, right? I could even modify the border radius. So maybe I wanted the user to be able to pass in their own border radius. I could do that as well. So I could say like border radius over here, and you know, maybe in here I pass in like 100 pixels or something. And hopefully you're kind of getting the process, right? So what could be kind of fun, and this is going to look horrible, but what could be kind of fun is just to play around with this for like 20 minutes or something. And you can just get an idea of like how these props work. And so now over here, this would be props dot border radius, etc. Now these are all going to have different border radiuses, right? And because these ones are like so big, it's not going to be a difference, but you get the point. Cool. So these props, super powerful. Like I said, you can pass just about anything in. You could pass in a component as a prop. You could pass in a function, Boolean, object, anything really. Anything that's like a value in JavaScript, you could pass in. All right, so let's get rid of this. Now, sometimes you'll be passing in like styling stuff. Sometimes you'll be passing in like increment stuff. It just depends on the component that you're building. But to kind of go back to the styling thing, there are some other ways that we can style as well. And probably one of the best ways to style stuff is using like external style sheets. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes. So an external style sheet is like a CSS file or like an SCSS file where you have a bunch of styles and then you can style them like this. So this isn't really like, it's an okay way to style components in React, but it's not really like how most people do it. Most people are going to be using external style sheets. So that's what we're going to look at right now. So I'm actually just going to get rid of this stuff. Let's undo this like button color stuff. Or you know, we can keep this in. This is fine. I like this. Okay, we'll just get rid of the border radius though. Okay, so this is working now. Let me show you how we can start introducing CSS into this. Like how can we add a CSS document in here to make this, to kind of style this. Now, one of the things that we want to do when we're working with CSS is we want to make sure that we keep this really organized. And a really common way of styling things in React is using like a CSS style sheet, but it's important that we put it in the right spot. So I'm going to create another folder over here, and why don't we call this like styles? And you don't have to do this, but this is kind of what I like to do. So I'm going to create a new file in here, which I'm going to call global.css. So this is going to be like where I'm keeping all of my global CSS styling. And in here, we can just put whatever we want, right? So maybe I want to style, I want to make it so that so we can use this like wildcard character, and this just means like it'll style everything. This isn't meant to be like a CSS lesson or anything, but we could say like font size, and maybe this is like 1.5 rem. So this is just going to like up the font size a lot, okay? That's all this is going to do. And because I'm in a CSS file, now I can write CSS the right way. I don't have to write it in that like weird JavaScript syntax. And what I can do is I can take this global.css file and I can actually import it into my JavaScript. So I'm going to go over to index.js, and inside of this index.js file, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say import. And then you're just going to say, you're going to basically put the path to this style. So I'm going to say /styles because it's in the styles folder. And then over here, and we're just going to say global.css. Now, because I've imported this in, it should automatically like update the stuff that's over here. And so you can see here when the page refreshes, now all the text is like a lot bigger. And really what I did is I made the text 1.5 times as big as it was. So this global styling is now being applied to everything here that's being rendered. So it'll be applied to the app, and it'll be applied to all the components that sort of occur below the app, okay? And I'll show you that. So we could style like the buttons. So we could say that these buttons are, I don't know, maybe like the width is like 100 pixels or something like that. So we'll change the width of these buttons. Now they're all the same. I can style all of those just from this global.css. So it's always a good idea, I think, to have a global CSS file. And we can just put this back here for now. But another strategy for doing styling is to have a style sheet that's specific to one component. This is another thing that you're going to see a lot in the industry. Like a lot of companies are going to do this. And I also want to use this to kind of introduce the idea of like a component module, I guess. I don't know. This is like a way of structuring your components so that they're a little bit easier to use. So I'm going to show you how this works. We're going to create a style sheet that is specifically for this count button. Okay, so over here, I'm going to create a new component, or sorry, a new folder. I'm going to call this count button. And now inside of this count button folder, I'm going to put this countButton.js file. Now, none of this is like necessary. This is just kind of like a way to organize your code, which I think is really good. So countButton.js is now in here. Now you'll see we're getting an error. So what we want to do is we want to come over to app.js, and my text editor automatically updated this for me, but you're going to want to update this so it's /countButton and in this new folder. Okay, so now we're storing this countButton.js file inside of this new folder. So now it's all wired up again. But what I can do then is let me create a new file in here, and we'll call this countButton.css. And in here, I'm going to put all of the styles that I want to use for my count button component. Okay, so in here, like maybe in my count button text, maybe this has an ID, or why don't we give this a class name? So here's another tidbit in JSX. If you want to define a class here on one of these elements, normally in HTML, you would do something like this. So you just say class. In JSX, it needs to be class name like that. So we can put the class name, and why don't we make this, we'll call this, count display. And what I can do then is I can import this countButton.css file. So I'm going to say import count button. Actually, wait, this needs to be, okay, so this will just be countButton.css. So we're going to import countButton.css, and that's right next to this file in our file system. So we don't need like a, we don't need like a special path or something. And then over here, we can actually write some CSS in here. So I can write, we can style this guy right here. So we can style the count display. So if I want to style count display, I'll make a class, and then over here we could say, maybe the background is like green or something like that. Now it looks like we're getting an error, and actually up here we want to put /. So yeah, I guess we need that / in there. I feel like you don't always need that though. Okay, well anyway, we need to put the / in there apparently. And you can see now the background has this green color. So once again, over here on this div, we created a class name, which is called count display. And actually another tidbit is if you have a string inside of these curly brackets, you can get rid of the curly brackets. So you just need to put the string there. That's fine too. And we're importing some style code from this countButton.css file. And all of this is stored in the same folder. Now, once again, this isn't necessary, but I really like to organize my code like this. So you can have your JavaScript, like your actual component in this file, and then right next to it, you have your CSS file. And just I guess you'd call this like a little like module or something, but by having both of these things in here, it just makes it this nice little sort of packaged deal. And if you want to change the styling, you just go in and change the styling and it all updates. Okay, so that's a really good way to organize your code. It's never too early to start organizing your code. And that is a little bit about styling and a little bit about how we can do this stuff. Okay, so now that we have the basics of all of that, I want to move on to a more complicated example. So what have we covered so far? We looked at vanilla.js, right? We looked at all that stuff. And then I kind of walked you through how we can bridge the vanilla.js into the React. So we set up a React code base entirely from scratch, right? And I showed you how we can use Babel to transpile JSX and how it all works with React DOM. And then we did create React app, right? So we went into create React app. We used that to create our app now. That's really awesome, right? It gives us all these cool tools that we can use. And then we learned about props and we learned about styling. So those are, I think, a lot of the like basic concepts in React. And if you just know those things, honestly, you can be pretty effective as a React developer. Like if you just really hone your skills on like the state management and all that sorts of stuff, it works. But there's a lot more to this. And so I want to show you an example of building a more complicated component. And what we're going to do is we're going to build a little like search bar component, and we'll have it like filter out some elements that are in a list. And there's a lot more concepts that I can introduce as we build this. Okay, so we're going to build a little search bar first, and then we'll kind of evolve off of that. Cool. So that is our goal then. We want to create a search bar. That's what I want to do. And we can talk about inputs and all that different stuff in React. It's going to be fun. But that's what we want to do. So I'm going to do something similar to what I did here with this count button. So I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call this, and why don't we call this just like search bar. And inside of here, I'm going to make a new file, and we'll call this searchbar.js. So searchbar.js is going to be in here, and then we could also make a CSS file for it. So we could say searchbar.css. And then in here, so we're starting our new component. We're going to import React from React, okay? And then let's also import this CSS file that we just created. So here we can import, and I'll use that / syntax, searchbar.css. Okay, then we're going to create our component, which is just a function. So we're going to say const search bar, and this is going to be equal to that. And then down here, we're going to export default search bar. So this is kind of the process that you go through for creating a component. And then finally, let's just return a div, something like that. Okay. So this is the process that you're going to go through when you're creating a component. Importing React, maybe you're importing a CSS file, maybe not. You're creating the component and then you're exporting it. Now what we want to do is we want to be able to see this. So you'll notice that if I like refresh my page over here, where's the search bar? We can write search bar here so it's more obvious. I don't see it over here, right? The reason we don't see it is because it's not getting rendered by app.js. So remember, it's only those things that are here in app.js which show up over there. So if I got rid of all these counters, those are gone. Bye-bye. If I typed in text into here, that's going to show up. So what we need to do is if we're going to build this search bar, we need to render it in here. So just like I did with count button, I'm going to import search bar from, and here we're going to go to the path. So the search bar is inside of the components folder, and then it's inside of this search bar folder. So here we can say /, and actually the app is in the components folder, so we don't need to do that. So we can just say search bar, I can't type that, capital B, and then search bar. So now we've imported this search bar component, and let's see. I need to learn the keyboard shortcut for closing this thing. I can never close it. Okay, so now in here we're gonna render out the search bar. Just like that, boom. So we have this search bar, and you can see now that that's showing up over here. So anything that we do inside of this search bar component, anything I put in here, is gonna get rendered out. Perfect. So now we need to actually build this search bar. And believe it or not, there is a specific way that we wanna handle like user input in React. And it's actually gonna be using some of like the React state. So before we get into any of that, let me just show you like how an input component works, or how an input element works by default, right? So this is our HTML input, and it's gonna take a type, which is gonna be text. So if I just render this out, you'll see that we have this nice little search bar, right? This is a nice little like input field. And I can type in here and that's all well and good. But this will actually take an attribute or a prop, which is called value. So over here, I could say like the value is equal to Mike. And if I do that, then you'll see Mike shows up inside of the search bar. Another thing you'll notice is if I try to type, so I'm trying to type right now, nothing shows up. So whenever we have a search bar, and if we give it this value, that's what's gonna be in the input field, no matter what. So I can't change this, I can't remove it, I can't add anything to it. It's just what's gonna be there. And this is something that we wanna leverage in React, and I'm gonna show you how that works in a second. Okay, so this is the first like part of this input element that I wanted to just kind of point out, that we can have a value, and whatever we put in here as the value, that's what's gonna show up over here. And because we're using React, we could have this be a variable, right? So I could say const, search value, and this is gonna be equal to the search value. If I can type a V, good. And then over here inside of value, we could just put search value. Okay, so once again, with these little like prop things here, if you just have a string, you can just put like the string there. But if you have anything else, then it needs to go in these curly brackets. So here we could put the search value. And now check this out. That's what's going to show up over here. Okay, so if I try to type, if I try to backspace, it doesn't work. None of that's working. It's because we're explicitly defining what the value is. Now, one of the things you might notice is this is looking very similar to something that we did before. So when we had that count, we had a value, and that, like, I think it was current count, right? And that was equal to 0. And we talked about how this is actually like a piece of state in your application. Well, believe it or not, this is going to end up being something similar. So this search value is going to end up being just like the current count. It'll end up being a piece of state. Now, we talked about the use state hook. We talked about how we can do state management in React. And that's essentially what we're going to do here. Now, before we get into that, though, I just want to show you how we could update this input. So there is a event. So remember we had like the click event, or what was it, on click? Yeah, it was on click. And this gets fired anytime you click on the elements, right? So we had this little function, and actually we could, whatever. We had a function, right? And it got executed when we would click on the element. Well, there's another one of these, which is called onChange. And this is specific to these inputs. So whenever this input changes, we can put a function in here, which is going to listen for that. And then whenever the input changes, that function will get called. So let's create a function up here, and we're going to call this handle input change. And this is just going to be an arrow function. Okay. And then why don't we do an alert here? Okay. So we'll pass this into there. And now let's see what happens. So technically what should happen is when I try to type a character, this function should get executed, because this function is going to get executed whenever the input changes, and then I'll alert out here changed. Let's see if that happens. So I'm going to type, I'll type like a J, and you'll see right there that the input changed. Cool. So now we know how to listen for text that's changing. But the question becomes, how do we know like what the new text is? So this is actually going to take an argument, which is going to be called event. And if we console log out event.target.value, event.target.value, and let's open up the console over here. You'll see, so whenever I type something out, like if I type a J, you'll see that this prints out the search value J. So what's happening here is whenever we type something into this search bar, like if I type my J, okay, this function is getting called, and React is going to pass it something called an event. So this is going to get passed into our function, this event object, and then there's this sort of like deeply nested attribute on here, which is event.target.value. And that's going to tell us what the new value of the input should be. Okay. So now you'll notice that if I type a J, or if I type, an A, B, C, D, E, like if I type all these different things out here, the value of the input doesn't change. All we're doing is we're getting the updated value. So basically React is telling us, like event.target.value is telling us what the user wants the new value to be. But remember, we're not updating the DOM because we haven't told React that we want to update it yet, right? And all this is down here is the value is just the search value. So when onChange, when this function gets called, React tells us, here's the event that got fired, and here's the value that the user wants to be inside of that input field. Now down here, this is where we have the value stored. So what we want to do is we want to use state in order to get all of this to work together. So instead of having like search value over here, just be the search value, instead we're going to use that state hook, and we'll do it that way. So let me just show you how this works, and then we'll walk through it one more time, because I know this is getting a little confusing. So we have like use state over here, and now instead of having this like search value, I'm going to say const, and we're going to use this funky syntax again. So const, and my tabs are all off. I got to fix that. We're going to say search value, and then set search value. And this is going to be equal to use state. Just like that. Okay, so we have our search value. This will end up being the piece of state, set search value. And then over here, we're going to put the default value. So remember when we were creating that counter, like we put a 0 in here? Actually, we can see that. So in the count button code, we put a 0 in here because that's what we wanted to be the default value. We can do the same thing for this stuff. So over here, we're back on the search bar component. Instead of a 0, why don't we just put an empty string? Or no, let's put, yeah, we can put the search value. We'll keep it the same. So nothing about this program should change, right? It's just now that this search value, which we're putting down here as the value of the input, this is now registered as a piece of state in our React app, which means we can tell React that we want to update that, and then React will update the DOM for us, which is what we talked about with the count button. And so what we want to do is we want to take this value, remember event.target.value, this is a value that React is giving us. React is saying, hey, this is what the user wants the new value of the text field to be. So why don't we just take that and we'll say set search value equal to event.target.value. In other words, we're going to set the new value of the search field down here to be equal to what the user wanted to change it to. In other words, what the user typed in. So now if I come over here and I type this J, you'll see that it's magically showing up now. Now this search bar is kind of working. Okay, so all of this is stored inside of this search value piece of state. One of the cool things about this is that I could come down here and I'll use interpolation. So I'll use this open and close curly bracket. And I could say like search value just like that. And check it out. Now, if I start typing, you'll see that the search value is actually showing up down below this because this is stored as a piece of state. Okay, I know this is complicated. There's a lot going on here. We're like using inputs and states together. So I'm just going to recap one more time exactly what's going on here. And we'll talk about how this is like using the state and everything. So a piece of state, like I've said before, is a value that is going to, probably going to end up being updated in the user interface somewhere, right? So whenever the piece of state updates, we want to update the user interface to reflect that. And React is going to do all of that in the background. We don't have to worry about it. So we have this search value, and this is going to be a piece of state. So this is a piece of state that's going to be involved in the user interface that's probably going to get updated. And whenever it does, we want to update the user interface, etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this search value as the value in this input field. So the value of the input field, as I said, whatever's in here, like if I just type my name, that's what's going to show up inside of the search bar, right? And we have all sorts of logic in here, so that's why it changed. But whatever the value is in here, that's what's going to show up over here, okay? And so I want the value of that to be this search value that we're storing in our piece of state. So far so good, right? The default value is like the search value. We could change it to it'll show up down here. But what we want to do is we want to listen for whenever the user types into that search bar. So if the user hits a key, then this is going to get executed, right? So this handle input change, this is going to get executed. And React is handling all of this in the background. When that gets executed, React is going to give us something called the event object. And maybe we could even just like console log that out just to kind of look at it. There's nothing really too interesting here. We pretty much just need .target.value, but this is like this whole thing in here that you can see. So the event.target.value, this is the value that the user is trying to put into the search box, right? So this is like what the user wants to update this value to, and we're going to use that to set the search value. Cool. Now, there are other ways that you can do this in React. So there's other ways that we can handle inputs. Personally, this is what I found to be the most common. This is also, I think, the recommended way of doing things, which is using like values like this, but it's possible that there's another way to do it. But this is generally how that works. Okay, so I know that was complicated, but hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, I would just recommend playing around with it. Try to get a feel for like what this is doing, all that different stuff. Cool. And so now that we have our like search bar wired up, right? And now that we're storing this search value inside of the state of our application, I'll show you some cool things that we can do with that. So one thing that I want to add on to this search bar is a clear button. And you'll see this a lot of times on websites, or I think probably more so on mobile apps, is you'll start typing into the input and then there's like a little X button that pops up. And if you click on it, it'll clear out the search bar. That's what we're going to do here. And I'll show you why it's important that we're storing this in the state. So let's create a button. And this can just be really simple. We don't need to like make this too complicated here. And this is just going to be like clear. So we're going to say clear. So we now have this clear button. And what I want to happen is whenever I click on this clear button, I want all the text in here to disappear. So I want to clear out all the text. Now, first things first, let's just have the default text up here be just an empty string. That's generally what you're going to want to do. These inputs should start, empty by default. And whenever we click this button, like I said, we want to clear out the search value. So we already know how to do a click handler, right? I can do on click and it's open and close curly brackets. But what we want to do now is, and why don't we make another function up here called handle clear click. And then we'll pass that into this on click. And so what this is going to do now is whenever we click on this, we want it to clear out whatever's in this over here. Now, I'll say this, you have all of the information that you need to be able to do this on your own. So it might be worth pausing the video and see if you can figure out how you would do this. It's one line of code. We've gone over that line of code before. So just see if you can figure it out. So yeah, I guess pause the video now. So if you didn't pause the video, I will show you exactly how to do it. And it's going to be the same code that's up here. So we're going to use this set search value. Remember, we've registered this piece of state with React. Whenever we want to update it, we need to do it using this set search value variable that we've gotten back. Okay, so up here, we're setting the search value equal to event.target.value. Down here, we just want to set the search value equal to an empty string, because this is going to basically clear out the entire search bar. So let's see if this works. I'm going to type in hello world, and now I can click on clear, and you'll see that it cleared it out. So let's walk through it, right? I type in all this text. We talked about, this is handling all of that. Now, when I click on this clear button, we're going to execute the handle clear click function, and this is going to set the search value equal to be just empty. And because we're setting the search value, React is going to update the user interface to reflect that. And now we have this like awesome clear button that's totally working. So believe it or not, this is like literally all the logic that would be contained in a, in like a clear button like that. Now, obviously you might change the styling and all that stuff, but as far as React is concerned, that's all the logic that we need. Another thing I could do is if I wanted to, I could change this to be like the text is cleared. And so now if I did this, like the text is cleared would pop up. So there's all sorts of different things like that, right? We could change it around. But for the clear button, it's just going to be empty. Cool. Now, hopefully that gives you a little bit more of an idea about working with state, right? You just need to practice this stuff in order to get better at it. But that's really how we would do things with these inputs. Now, going back to this clear button, we can use this to cover another concept in React, which is called conditional rendering. And conditional rendering is this idea that we only want to render something out onto the screen. In other words, we only want to display something to the user when a certain condition is met. And this is used all the time. Like this is like the bread and butter of like writing React components like this. And so let's say this, right? This clear button is here no matter what text is inside of the search bar. So if there's text in the search bar, the clear button's there. But even if there's nothing in there, it's still there. And it doesn't make sense for it to be there, right? If there's nothing in there, there's nothing to clear out, so the button is useless. So what I want to do is I want to write some logic so that we only display the clear button when there's text that's been typed into there. And it's actually like a lot easier than you might think to do this. And this is where we're getting into conditional rendering. So let me show you how to do this. In order to only display this button when when we want to display it, we're first going to need a Boolean value. And the Boolean value is going to tell us whether or not we should display the button. So I'm going to create a constant here, and I'll call it should display button. And like I said, this needs to be like a Boolean true or false value, something that we can use in like kind of like an if statement. So should display button, this is going to be whether or not the search value is populated, I guess. So this is going to be search value.length is greater than 0. Okay, and this is where, like, if you're not super strong with JavaScript, this might throw you off a little bit, but basically this is what we call a Boolean expression. So it's an expression that can get like, it can get sort of, I don't know what I always forget what this word is whenever I teach this stuff. It can get reduced down to a Boolean value. That's what it is. So this is either going to be true or false. So let's go ahead and console log this out. So we'll console log out if we should display the button. Okay, so initially we're saying that we shouldn't display the button. So we're getting a false here. And that's true, right? Because, well, that's true. Okay, this is confusing. That is correct. So this is false because there's nothing inside of the search bar. If I was to type a letter, now you'll see that this becomes true. So when there's a letter here inside of the search value, in other words, when the search value's length is greater than 1, that means that we should display the button because there's something to clear out. If I was to backspace and get rid of this J, now it's false again. It's false again because we don't need the clear button anymore. There's nothing in there to clear out. So when I type text in, you can see it's true. And then as long as there's still text in here, it's still true. And then boom, now we're false. So this is the first step to this conditional rendering, is we need some sort of logic. We need some sort of a Boolean expression or something, some true or false value that'll tell us whether we should render it out. And you can do it just like this, like creating it in a named variable like that. That's totally fine. Here's where the tricky part comes in. And it's not tricky to understand, but the syntax is a little tricky. So we're going to make an open and closed curly bracket. Now we've talked about how open and closed curly brackets are for interpolation. This is where we can put JavaScript values inside of here. But we can also put like JavaScript expressions inside of here. So whatever goes inside of here is just like JavaScript that we can use. Now, I'm going to do this what I think is like kind of the easiest way. I'll show you this, but it actually goes back to a concept which is called short circuiting. So if any of this is confusing, like really confusing, I would just do a quick Google search for like short circuiting. I'm not going to go into it right here just because it's kind of out of the context of the video, but that's what I'm using here. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say should display button and then a double ampersand. And then over here, we're going to paste in this button code. Now notice that all of this is here inside of these curly brackets. So the curly brackets start, the curly brackets end. I'm saying should display button and all of this text down here. So let's just see if this works, and then I can go through and explain it some more. So if I start typing, you'll see the clear button shows up, and then if I get rid of all the text, the clear button goes away, right? So this down here is what we call short circuiting. Like I said, if you want a deeper dive, you can just do a Google search for that. But basically it's saying if this is true, then we're going to render out whatever's over here. But if this is false, then we're not going to render out this stuff over here. Okay, we call that short circuiting. We call this conditional rendering in React. But that's basically what we're doing over here, right? So whenever this is true, then we render this out. If it's false, then we don't. And you can do this for anything. So you could have, different things in here for that. But that's how we can get the, kind of like the clear button wired up and going. Okay, so we type in, clear button pops up. Once there's no text, clear button goes away. And that's pretty like basic. Like you'll see this a lot of times in React, people using this short circuiting. You also see people using ternary operators here, if you know what ternaries are. If not, we're going to talk more about those later as well. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do then is I want to move on to building out this component a bit more. So this is kind of everything that we need to know about the input, right? This works, and we've spent a lot of time talking about how we use state with these inputs. Now, this same strategy can work for any type of input. So if you have a text box, if you have a number field, if you have a checkbox, radio button, there might be some like special things that you need to do, but for the most part, this strategy is what you want. So you want to store the value inside of a piece of state, and then you want to pass in the value to the input field, right? So, if this was like a number thing or whatever, right? It's just like a little bit different, but it's the same thing. It works exactly the same way. Cool. Okay, so the next thing I want to do then is we want to add on to this search bar. So let's say that we're building a website and we have a list of items that we want to display to the user. So we have, maybe we're building a website for like a store or like an e-commerce site, and we want to be able to display out like all the products that we have. One of the cool use cases that you'll see on a lot of websites, and something we can do with React, is build a filter search. So if I had a bunch of items that were like listed out one after the other, and I started typing into this search box, I could actually filter out the items that are getting displayed, so it's only the ones that match what's in the user input. And so that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to show you how to build that. And there's going to be a couple of different more like topics that we can go over, a couple of things I can show you related to that as well. But I will say that we've gone through a lot of like the core stuff in React. Cool. So let's go ahead and do this. I want to show you how we can display out a number of different, I guess, like items maybe that would be in this e-commerce store, right? So I'm going to create a constant up here. I'm going to do this outside of the search bar, and we're going to call this products. And I'm going to make this an array, and then we're just going to put a bunch of like products in here. So maybe this is like a convenience store or something. So there's like, maybe there's toothpaste, toothbrush, and I am looking at my notes because I have specific items that I want to put in here. Mouthwash, maybe this is a dentist office. I don't know. I have a lot of like teeth related things in here. So dental floss, and then finally, maybe you can buy like a mouth guard or something. Cool. So yeah, I guess this is all like teeth related products. I don't know why I did that, but you can see here that we have a list of all these products. Now, what I want to show you how to do is I want to show you how we could render or display all of these products like in a list. And this is another really, really common thing that you're doing in React or just front-end web in general, is that you have like a collection of items and you want to show them one by one to the user. So this products variable is out here. Now let's go back into our component, into search bar. And down here, we're going to actually render all of these out below this clear button. Okay. So before we do that, I need to talk about the map function. And the map function is a function, well, it's like this functional programming function if you want to get like specific, but the map function is going to allow us to take all of the elements in an array and map them into elements in a different array, if that makes sense. So basically, like maybe we can do a console log here just to kind of show this. So I could say products.map, okay, and why don't I put this on a new line? So products.map, so all arrays have this map function that they're using. And if you need more help on this, like there's tons of tutorials on this online too. I'm just gonna give you a quick overview. This is gonna take a function, okay, so this will take like an arrow function. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna map all of these products into another array. So it'll map all the items in this array into another array. So this is gonna take one argument, which would be like the product. And then if we return, so we could return like, I don't know, product dot to uppercase. And so this is gonna take all the products that are in this products array and it'll map them into another array where they're all uppercase. So now you can see over here on the console, like all of this is printed out. So once again, this isn't meant to be like a beginner's JavaScript tutorial. So if you need more help on the map function, tons of stuff out there. But I just wanted to give a quick explanation real quick. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take all of these elements in here and we're gonna map them into divs. So we're basically gonna map them into like JSX tags. And you'll see how this works in a second. So let's do this down here. It's probably better to just show you. So we'll make an open and close curly bracket. And I'm gonna say products dot map. So I'm going to do basically the same thing that I did before. So all of this is the same, except instead of, returning, and this is going to be the product. So instead of returning product dot to uppercase, instead I'm going to return some JSX from here. So I'm going to make this a div, and inside of this div, I'm going to put the product. So now check this out. If I save this, you'll see that all of these items are now showing up over here on the browser. And that's because I've taken all of these products and I've mapped them into divs. So we could also map these into like list items. Maybe that's a little better. So now we have like all these list items. That's looking good. And you could even surround this whole thing with an unordered list if you want. So I could put all of this into like this unordered list, and now it's all sort of formatted nicely. Cool. So we've mapped all of these different products. Now, one thing you'll notice is if we go over here on the console, we're getting this error. It says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Whenever you do mapping like this, you always need to give these elements a prop which is called key. So you're going to need to come in here and you're going to need to make this, which is called key, and then in here you need to put a value. So for us, since we're mapping over this array of strings, we can just put product. So we'll just put the name of the product. And now React should stop yelling at us, whoops, for that. Cool, so what does this key do? Well, this key is used internally by React, and I'm not gonna claim to know like exactly what's going on there, but it's used by React in order to identify the element in the list. So one of the most frequent things that React developers are doing is stuff like this. You're just mapping over like data structures. You're mapping over an array or an object, and you're displaying each element one by one. So React is going to use this in order to uniquely identify each one of these, in this case, products. Okay, because a lot of times what happens is React will be rendering out all these different elements kind of like this in a list, but sometimes they're very complex, and each one of those elements might be like this very complex component in itself. And so React will use this key, so just in case an element gets removed from the list, or if the list gets rearranged, React will use this key to be able to know which things it needs to update. It's just like a performance thing. At least that's how I understand it. So hopefully that's right. But yeah, that's basically what this key is doing. Okay, it's just like a unique identifier that React is using. Okay, so that's how we can map over things, and this is very common, like I said. But anytime that you have a data structure like this, you always want to map over it like that. Okay. So now the question becomes, now that we know how to map all of these things out, how do we make it so that when I type in here, this gets filtered? So in other words, if I start typing in tooth, I only want those elements that have tooth in them to show up on the browser, right? Or if I type in wash, I would only want this to show up. Or if I typed in an E, I would only want the products with an E in their name to show up, right? So mouth guard probably wouldn't show up. So how do we do that? Also mouthwash. Well, this is when we sort of combine this search value with all of these products down here. Now this is going to get a little complicated, okay? We're going to be using another one of these. Instead of map, it's called the filter function. So if you're not understanding this, this might be one of those things where you just have to go back and rewatch, or if you didn't understand map, you might need to like hone up your skills on the map function, right? That's probably why you're not understanding it. But let me show you how to do this. So there's another function in here which we call filter. So let's console log this out. So I could say products.filter, and once again, you can look this up and get you can get a better explanation of this. But this, just like map, is going to take a function. So it'll look like this. And why don't we move this out here? Okay. So products.filter. This is going to take the product. Now, in this filter function, I can return either a true or a false. So this is going to get executed for each element that's inside of this products array. And if we return true, that means the element's going to stay in the array. And if we return false, that means the element's going to get removed from the array. So if we returned like product dot includes the word mouth. So let's just say we did this, right? If we just ran this code, this is now going to filter out the products array. so that only the elements that include the text mouth are in there. So look down here. Now we have mouthwash and mouth guard. Let's say I was to filter this by tooth. Now you'll see that only the elements that have tooth in their name are going to show up. If I filter this by an empty space, all of the elements are now going to show up. So you can see that right there. So this is basically how we would filter an array in JavaScript. And this has nothing to do with React. This is just like vanilla JavaScript. But this is a very common strategy for how we would do this. So like I said, if you're not fully clear on what filter's doing, I would recommend just like going and practicing it a little bit. But otherwise, I'll show you how we can utilize it in React. So I'm actually going to create a constant down here, and I'm going to call this filtered products. And filtered products is just going to be equal to all of this. But now, instead of filtering it by like mouth or by tooth, I want to filter it by the value that's inside of the search bar. So we can filter this by the, what is it called? Search value. And so now whatever is up here, maybe it's an empty string, maybe it's the string tooth, maybe it's the string to, maybe it's the string mouth, whatever it is, whatever's in the search value, that's what's going to be used to filter all these products. And so then down here, instead of mapping over the products, so you can see right here, we're saying products.map. Now I want to say filtered products.map. So we're going to map over only those elements which are filtered. So if this is an empty string, you can see that all the elements are showing up here. If I was to start typing in tooth, now only the stuff for tooth shows up. So remember, this all goes back to the state management stuff, right? So every time that we update the state, and we saw this with the counter button, we've seen this with this, every time we update the state, this search bar function, like this component, gets re-rendered or re-executed by React. And so every time that the state updates, this whole thing gets re-executed. So whenever the search value changes, this code down here is going to get executed again, and we will then filter out the products based on that updated search value. So that's why all this needs to be in the state. And this is another good example of using the state to inform what should show up on the screen. Right, so we use the state as the value in this input, that was good, but we're also using the state in order to filter out these products. And so this whole thing, this whole process is what we call the React lifecycle. This is like the component lifecycle, or in this case, like the functional component lifecycle. So this is like the whole process that it's going through. And as a new React developer, you don't need to really understand all of that, but hopefully you at least get the vibe or the feel for what it is. So this is actually a pretty complex application that we've been able to build with just a few lines of code. I mean, this is less than 50 lines of code, and we've written this whole thing out. And this is a good example of something that would be very difficult to do in vanilla JavaScript. It'd be very messy, and we would probably end up writing a lot of the same logic that React is doing anyway to make it cleaner. So this is a good reason to use React. Now, this is good, but this can actually be a little bit better. So if you remember with the counter, we were able to make it more reusable by allowing an increment by prop to be passed into it. So with the count, right, we had something like this. So count button, and we could pass in the increment by, right? So I could pass in like an 11 in here. And then I think we also had another one. What was that? Like the button color or something. This is blue. Right, so we had this, and it took all these different props, and we could increment it by 11, which makes it more usable or something like that. We can do the same thing with the search bar. Now, one thing with the search bar that would be good to be able to pass into it would be this products right here. So these products are just kind of stored in this variable here inside of the search bar component file. But imagine that we wanted this search bar filter to be able to work with any types of products, right? Any list of products that we could pass into it. Well, we can do that with props, and that'll make this way, way, way more reusable. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So actually, let me keep this here, or I'm just going to cut this. So cut that, and then let's go back over into app.js. Now, I'm going to put this here in app.js, this products, and I'll pass this into the search bar as a prop. So maybe here we could say like search items. You know, we can call this whatever we want. And here I'll pass in the products as the search items. So when we render the search bar, we're passing in a prop called search items, and that's going to be an array of strings which has all of the items in it that are like in our e-commerce store or whatever. So then down here, let's go back to the search bar component, and this is going to take some props, right? And then over here, so we can change this. So instead of products, we're going to call this props dot. And you know what? I kind of don't like the name of this. Let's call the prop products, just because that'll be easier. Okay. So the prop now is called products, and then this over here is also called products. But that's the name of the prop. So that's just so we don't have to change all this code. So now we have props up here, and we could say props dot products dot filter over here, okay? And then down here, actually I don't think we need to change anything else. So let's save this, and we'll see if this component works. So you'll see it's working exactly the same way. We haven't really changed anything at all. All we've done is we've come up here and we've specified that the search bar now takes a prop, which is called products, and into that prop we can pass whatever products we want it to render out. The search bar is then using props.products in order to, display and do all the stuff that we just kind of talked about. So now what we could do is we could create like another products array, and we could use that on another search bar. So why don't we come down here? Now we could pass this directly into this search bar. So I can say products, and then we'll just pass this array directly in. And then if I wanted, I could copy this and we could do another one. So now we'll change the products for this second one. So why don't maybe this could be like bike related stuff. So maybe this is like bike rack, mountain bike. We could do like, maybe this is like a sporting goods store. I don't know, soccer bike, soccer ball. Okay, anyway. And so now we have this first filter up here, which has all this tooth stuff. And then down here, we have the one which is for like this biking stuff, right? And we're able to reuse it. So the same logic, like if I start typing in here, it'll start filtering these things out. And up here, I can do the same thing. They're using different data, but at the end of the day, it's the same filtering logic. It's the same logic, the same state logic for all this stuff. It's just that we're passing in different data. And that's really why this component is powerful, is because it can operate on different data sets. It can operate on data that you have for these products or data for those products. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter where this data is coming from. You just have to pass it in here as a prop, okay? So hopefully that makes sense why that's like good and why that's, reusable, and why that's something that we might be interested in doing. Okay, so that is a lot of stuff, but believe it or not, there's even more stuff that we can get into. And so that's what I want to get into next. We're going to talk about another one of these React hooks, which is called use effect. And we'll also learn how to make HTTP requests to get data from like external APIs and sources, okay? Okay, now before we get into any of this, I want to introduce this new hook. So there's a bunch of these different React hooks. We saw use state and we've seen how to kind of use it. And that's by far the most common hook. That's probably what you'll be using 80% of the time. But there's a bunch of these other hooks too that we can talk about. And I'm going to talk about one other one, which I think is probably the other most common, which is called use effect. Use effect is also a little bit confusing. So I'm going to try to just break it down as well as I can, but just understand that this isn't like the most maybe beginner friendly thing, but I'll show you a couple use cases where we can use it. Okay, so just a little disclaimer there, but I'm going to demonstrate this in the countButton.js stuff. Okay, this is a good component to demonstrate this on. So the first thing that we want to do is let's go back and, okay, well, actually no, I'm just gonna comment this out. So I'll comment all of this out. And I'm going to render out one of these count buttons. So let's render out a count button. It's going to have an increment by. This can be like 5. And then I think it needs a button color too. So this can just be blue. Okay, so we have our count button that's going to get rendered out over here. Now, what I want to show you is how use effect works. Okay, let's see how I can explain this. Okay, so useEffect is a hook which is going to allow us to respond to different events that happen in the life cycle of the component. Maybe that's not super helpful. useEffect, the way that it's used mostly is it'll allow us to run code whenever a piece of state updates or whenever the component initially loads. Okay, so the first thing we'll do just to take a look at this, and I want to get rid of some of this like styling here. This is just kind of ugly. Actually, no way, that's going to throw an error. Okay, let's get rid of that. And then we can get rid of this. Good. Okay, so we have this component, and actually, I want to get rid of that red too. Okay, cool. So we have this component, and it's working just like it did before. So let me show you kind of what useEffect can do, and I'll just sort of demonstrate this. So up here, next to useState, we're going to make a comma, and you're going to say useEffect. So this is generally how we import all of these React hooks from React. And then down here, just above the return statement, I'm going to say useEffect, and this is a function. So just like we called useState, and then we got some stuff back, we're going to call useEffect. Now, this is going to take two parameters. Okay, the first parameter is going to be what we call a callback function. And this is going to be a function that's going to get executed when useEffect needs to get executed. And I'll talk about that in a second, but let's just put an arrow function in here. So I'm just going to do that. Okay, I have my arrow function. That's all good. Now, the second argument is going to be an array. Now, it is very, 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 very important that you put an array here. Okay, this is like the most common mistake that people make. I was teaching a boot camp and we were learning React, and almost all my students mess this up at some point. So this is a very common mistake, but you need to make sure that you put an array in here. Okay, and there's reasons for that we don't need to get into, but make sure that this second argument is here, because otherwise you're going to get into this like infinite rendering loop with your component. It's going to be crazy. Okay, so we need this function right here, and then the second argument is going to be these open and closed square brackets, right, in an empty array. Now let's take a look at what happens here. So I'm just going to put console.log in here, and I'll say useEffect called, or why don't we say useEffect function called, right? So if this code executes, that means that the useEffect hook has executed the code that is inside of here. Fair enough. So let's refresh the page, and you'll see here that, okay, we can get rid of this console log too. We don't need that. And clear this out. So you'll see here that it says the useEffect function was called. Okay, so in its most basic form, useEffect is a function that you can execute when the component loads. Okay, if you've ever learned React maybe in the past, or if you've learned like class components in React, there's something called component did mount, and you don't need to worry about what that is if you don't know, but just to make the parallel, this right here is equivalent to component did mount. This function is going to get called after all of this has been rendered and mounted onto the browser. Okay, so this is going to get called, or sorry, this function up here that we pass into useEffect will get called once the component is what we call mounted, basically once it's like, you know, loaded up onto the browser, okay? And there's a lot of different reasons why we might need to do this, and we'll see one in a little bit. But this little array here, or actually, let me do this. So if I click on this button, the state of this component is updating, but you'll notice that this doesn't get called again, right? So this gets called when the component first loads or when it mounts, but then if I change the component at all, this doesn't get called anymore, okay? That is, unless we head over to this little array guy that I was just talking about. And in this array, I can pass in all of the different pieces of state that I want useEffect to respond to. So if I put the current count in here, and then I come over here, let's refresh. Now check it out. So useEffect function was called. That's when the component first loaded on the browser. If I click on the +5, you'll see that it got called again. And every time I click on this, you can see that it keeps getting called. So every time I click on it, that gets called, and this function now is like executed, okay? So this is what useEffect is used for. First and foremost, it's used as a, I guess you'd call it like a lifecycle hook, or it would be used as a way to determine like when this gets updated. But another thing you can do is you can pass in like current count, and this will also get updated, or this will also get called when the current count is updated, okay? You can have multiple use effects too. So I could come down here and we could have one use effect that is only called when component mounts, and this one is called when component mounts or the current count is updated, okay? And so now let's check this out. So if I refresh over here, the one that only gets called when the component mounts is called, and the one that calls when the component mounts or the current count is updated gets called. Now if I +5 on this, you'll see that this one only called when component mounts doesn't get called again. So you can use multiple ones of these. Okay, so that's a little bit about use effect. Now, why would we want to use this? Why is this useful? We're going to see a use case for the mounting thing in a little bit. And that's like kind of the common use case, but I want to show you a use case for something like this. So when we have the current count in here, one thing that we might want to do is we might want to do something when the current count gets to a specific number. So maybe when the current count gets to 10, I want to alert the user of that or something, right? So let's say this. So what I could do in here is I could write some logic. So I could say like if the current count is equal to 10, then I want to alert out the count is 10. So now check this out. Because we're having the use effect, if the current count reaches 10, and it's about to reach 10 right now, you'll see that we get this alert that says the count is 10. And maybe why don't we, let's make this so it's increments by 1, just so this is clear. Okay, so every time, and we can console log here, the current count. So every time that I click on this +1, you'll see that the code that's inside of this use effect runs, and that's because we have current count here inside of this. We call this a dependency array. So because current count is inside of the dependency array, we're going to execute this code, and every time I click it, you'll see that we're console logging out what the number is. But if we do this enough, when the number eventually gets to 10, now this logic is going to kick in, and we'll be able to do something, right? So we can change something, whatever, like it doesn't really matter, but we can basically do something. So we could say like the count is 10. Another thing that we could do with this is we could even like reset the count. So I could say set current count, and we could set it equal to 0. So now if I get all the way up to 10, you'll see once I get to 10, it resets it down to 0, and then, you know, whatever. So you can control like the different logic, you know, different types of logic with this. Okay, so that can be kind of useful. But generally, use effect is just used to respond to different things that are happening with the pieces of state. But it is all linked to these pieces of state. Cool. Now, you can also put multiple pieces of state in here. So we don't have multiple pieces of state, but if I had another like second piece of state, I could put that in here as well. And then that would get updated, or this function would get called when that gets updated too. Or, you know, if you had a second piece of state, you could create another use effect for your second piece of states, okay? But no matter what, whenever you're using use effect, you need to make sure that you include this second argument, okay? So it's either an empty array or something in there, but you can't do this because this is gonna mess with our program, okay? There needs to be something there. Now that we understand a little bit about the basics of use effect, and do keep in mind, this is one of the more advanced hooks, so if you're not fully getting it right now, that's okay. It is important to just practice. I will say this count button is the perfect example to practice use effect with, just like this. So play around with it, see if you can, see if you can figure it out. But I want to show you a use case that we would have for use effect where we just have an empty array, right? So when would this come into play? Like when would we need to use that? Well, this is a perfect thing for our search bar. So let's go back to that. I am going to uncomment this. And okay, so let's just do one search bar for now. So we have our search bar. Now, use effect is perfect anytime you're gonna be loading data. So one of the most common use cases with building React apps and user interfaces is that we need to load data from somewhere else. So when the user gets on our page, we might display a web page to them, but we might not have all the data that they need, right? Maybe, maybe you go on like Facebook or something and there's a little spinner and it's like, oh, we're loading your posts or loading the comments or something like that, right? There's a little spinner like, hey, we're waiting for stuff, like just chill out for a second. That's what I'm going to show you guys how we can build in this filter. And then eventually what we're going to do is we're actually going to get data from like an external source. So you'll learn how to do that as well. And it's actually it's not as hard as you might think. Okay, now remember, when we're using this search bar, we're passing in all of the products that we want the search bar to use. So this search bar, it's smart enough to be able to take in these products. And then when we type in here, it knows how to filter them out, right? So it's smart enough to do that and to figure that out. But the question is, where do these products come from, right? Because maybe these products are coming from somewhere where it's going to take them a second or two to load. And when we have a situation like that, useEffect can actually come in handy. So what I'm going to do is up here, I'm going to import useEffect, just like we did before. And I'm going to try to simulate what it would be like if these products were coming from somewhere else, were coming from somewhere external. Now, you're just going to need to kind of stick with me here for a couple minutes. Everything I'm doing might not make sense, but eventually I'm going to come back and I'll sort of explain why all of it fits together. But for now, just know that like if you just follow along, I will be able to explain all of this. So we have this useEffect and I copied this from over there. Now, with these products, if these products are like coming from somewhere where it's going to take them a while to load, or if you have any situation like that where you have a piece of data and it's going to take you a while to like get it, we want to store these in the state. So right now, these products are just kind of stored in this array and they're just sort of being passed directly into the search bar. But what we can do is we could actually store these inside of the state of the app component. So right now I'm working in the app component. We're not working in the search bar component anymore. We're not working in the count button component. We're working in this app component, which was that higher level component. So I'm going to create a piece of state here. So const open and close square brackets, and we're going to call this product state, and then we'll say set products state. And I spelled this wrong. And this is going to be equal to use state. And remember, in here, we can pass in a default value. So the default value I'm going to pass in is just going to be an open and closed square bracket. So it's going to be an empty array, and we need to import use state from up top here. So by default, the product state is just going to be an empty array. And then down here, I'm just going to pass an open and close square bracket. And actually make sure that you cut this because we're going to use this. So I'm going to pass in, not an open and close square bracket, I'm going to pass in the products state. So this search bar, the products that it's going to take in are going to be all the products from this products state. Now, remember that this useEffect hook, this is going to execute whenever the component mounts. So we could say component mounted. And once again, notice that we have an empty square bracket here. So you can see that when the page loads, then we get this component mounted. I wish we'd get rid of these these warnings. All right, whatever. Or wait, we could do, I feel like there's a way to do that. Anyway, okay. This is wasting time. So every time the component mounts, then we execute this code. And so what I want to do is when the component mounts, I want to actually like get these products and load these products in. So we can do this with like a set timeout. Now, hopefully this makes sense what I'm doing. What I want to do is I basically want to make it so that these products, like the product state doesn't load until like a couple of seconds after the user is seeing something. And that'll kind of allow us to build out like a little loading spinner and use this useEffect. So whenever the component mounts, in other words, whenever all this stuff shows up on the browser, we can do this set timeout. Now set timeout is it's like built into JavaScript and it takes 2 arguments. So you can pass in a function and then you can pass in a number of milliseconds. So if I put like 2000 milliseconds, that's 2 seconds. And then inside of this function, I could say products state is equal to all of this. So after 2000 milliseconds, after 2 seconds, this code right here is going to get executed. And what we want to do is we want to set the product state equal to all of this. Now remember, since we're using React, we can't just say product state is equal to this. we would have to say set product state. Okay, now let's take a quick look here. So when we load the page, you'll see that it's blank, and then 2 seconds later, all of this stuff is going to show up. Now I know like there's some confusing code here, I get that. But let me just walk you through one more time real quick what we did. So we created a piece of state called the product state, and initially it's just an empty array. And a lot of times when you're building applications, when your page first mounts like this, you're not going to have your products or your whatever. You're going to have to load them from somewhere else, okay, like an external server, or this is like very common to do in React, okay? And so we say product state, set product state. Initially, there's no products there. And then remember this use effect, this is going to run when the component actually mounts. So once the component is there and the user's seeing it, that's when we're going to run this code. And what I'm saying is after 2000 milliseconds, I want you to execute this code right here. And this is just simulating like the amount of time it would take to get data from some external server, from some database or something like that. So after 2000 seconds, we set the product state to be equal to all of these products, and that's what we get over here. So you can see here that it's blank, and then 2 seconds later, all of these things pop up, right? And I could set this to 5 seconds or whatever, it doesn't really matter, but that's kind of the idea. And so now, a lot of times when we're loading stuff like that, we want to show the user like a loading indicator. I want to say to the user, hey, you know, we're loading these things, like, because otherwise if we just have a blank screen like this, it looks kind of bad, right? The user's doesn't know what's going on. And if it takes 10 seconds to load something, it's not a good experience for the user. So let me show you how we could add in like a loading indicator, which would make it so that it would only show this stuff when it was loaded. Otherwise it would just say like loading or something like that. Now, in order to do this, we're going to be using something called the ternary operator. And I'll give you a quick rundown of what the ternary operator is, but just know that like this is part of what we're doing. So if you really don't understand it, and this is another thing to go off and do some research on, the ternary operator is, what's the best way to explain it? It's kind of like an if statement. It's kind of like an if-else statement, except it's used for values. So let me show you real quick. If I said false, and then I said question mark, and you can see I actually already have something in here that I've done before. So I'll say it's true, and then over here I'll say it's false. Okay, so let's just take a look at this syntax really quick. I have over here a Boolean value, okay? So this is how the ternary is set up. Over here on the left, we have a Boolean value, and then we put a question mark. Now, right next to the question mark, this is gonna be what gets returned if this is true. So if this value over here is true, then this will get printed out, or this will get, you know, this is the value that will it'll get evaluated to. Otherwise, it's going to be this. So if I hit enter, you'll see it says it's false. If I turn this into true, now it's going to say it's true. Okay, so it's similar to an if statement, except we're dealing with values here. So this is the kind of thing where you could say, like, I could create a variable here, like, is it true? And then I could set it equal to like a ternary, right? So I could say 5 greater than 3. This is technically a true or false value. It's like a Boolean expression. And I could say, you know, over here it'd be like, geez, I can't type today. It's true, otherwise it's false. So in this case, if we print it out, is it true? It'll say it's true because this value is going to end up getting stored in the variable. Okay, so that's my like 5-minute rundown of ternaries. If you don't get that, definitely recommend doing some side studying on that because that is important in React. But I don't want to get into it too much. Okay, so we're actually going to use one of those ternaries over here in our JSX. Now, the syntax here, once again, may be a little bit complicated. It's something you need to play around with. But I'm going to say, okay, well, basically, if these items are loaded, in other words, if the product state has items in it, if we have products, then I want to display all of this stuff, right? So that's this situation where we have products. I want to display the search bar and all the products so the user can filter through them. If we don't have any products though, for example, if the products is empty, then I don't want to display this. I want to display a loading indicator. And we can use the ternary to do that. So what I could do is we could create a variable over here called, has products, and this is equal to, you know, we could say product state dot length greater than 0. Okay, so this Boolean variable now has products. This will be true if there's products loaded. It'll be false otherwise. And so we can use that in here. I could say has products question mark. If there's products, then we want to render out the search bar. Otherwise, we want to render out the text loading. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens now. So the page reloads, and you'll see it says loading, and then 2 seconds later, we have all the products. So we're loading. 2 seconds later, all of these are in here. And the way this works is, once again, we have the products stored as a piece of state. Okay, when the component initially mounts, we're going to set a timeout. So 2 seconds after the component mounts, we are then going to set the product state and populate all of these products. Down here, we have some logic. This is conditional rendering logic. It's ternary logic, which is saying if we have products, and if we have products, that means the product state dot length is greater than 0. So if there's products in here, then we're going to render out the search bar. So if there's products, we render out the search bar. Otherwise, we just say that it's loading. And you could put in like a loading GIF here or something like it. You know, there's different ways to do this, but that's what it's going to be for now. So 2 seconds, and then we have all of the stuff. So this is another way to do conditional rendering. It's another way you can add a loading screen. This is just like how it's done normally in React. I don't know that you would want to do it any differently, but that's how it works. And this, like I said, is going to simulate for us this idea that we load the page and then we need to go off and load some other data, it's a pretty common use case in React. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to load real product data from like a real, what we call like an API, okay? So we call this an API, an application programming interface. Basically, this is a remote server which we can make a request to it and it'll give us actual products back. So when you're building like actual React apps, this is what you're gonna be doing. So you'll be like loading up components and then you're gonna need to get data from somewhere else. That's like a really common thing to do, okay? So there's this thing called the fake store API, and you can just, I think it's fakestoreapi.com. And I'm over here on just the docs page. And let me show you like what this is. So this is a website where if we go to this URL, so there's this URL here, fakestoreapi.com/products. If I paste this into my browser, you'll see here that it gives me all of this data back. Now this data is what we refer to as JSON data. It's JavaScript object data, yeah. Or JSON is JavaScript object notation, but this is basically like JavaScript objects that this page is going to give us back. And so this just has a bunch of different JavaScript objects in it that define information about different products. So you can see over here, there's like this backpack product. Here's like a slim fit t-shirt product, a cotton jacket product. Generally, when you're building apps in React, this is the kind of thing that you'll do. So let's say you're working for like an e-commerce company, you build them a React website, you'll have something like this. So you'll have your little search bar and you want to display all your products. When the page initially loads, you're going to have to then make a request to your API or whatever and get all this data from it. So I want to show you how to do that. It's actually a really simple process. Okay, so I'm going to have JavaScript go to this website, get all of this JSON data, get all of this product data. We're going to bring it into our app and then we're going to display that. Okay, and this is like a more realistic use case for what we're doing here instead of the set timeout. And we'll have the loading thing like go in with that as well. Now, if you go over to the website, where was that website? Okay, so we're over here on this website with this docs page. It actually gives you the JavaScript that you need to know. So this isn't like a course on, we call this like making an HTTP request. I'm not gonna get too much into like what fetch is doing and all that. I just wanna show you how it works in JavaScript or in React, but you're just gonna copy this code and let's just paste this directly into the use effect. And we'll go back over here. Okay, so we have this code. Now, this code is using asynchronous JavaScript. And this whole thing is basically like using the JavaScript promises API. So once again, not something that I'm really going to get into here, but if you're interested about what this is doing, you can look up like promises or just like fetch and you can kind of get a better idea for it. But this is how we would basically make a request to this website and then get all of that data back, okay? So then down here, you can see, and I wanna make sure I do this right. So I'm gonna make an open and close curly bracket right on this line, and then let's just console.logout JSON. Okay, so I know I didn't explain this too well, but it would take me 20 minutes to really explain what this is doing, so I don't think it's worth it. Now, what you'll see down here though is whenever we do this console.log, this is gonna be all of the data that's over here on this page. So let's take a look. I'm going to refresh my page, and you'll see there that after like a couple seconds, all of this data showed up. Now, the reason it's taking a couple seconds is because our computer is like literally going out onto the internet and grabbing all this data and then bringing it back. And because we're using this fetch function and we're using this like res.json thing here, we're able to convert it into something that we can use in JavaScript. Okay, so that's all you need to know here is we're going out to this fake store API, we make a request, and then it gives us back all of this stuff. We convert that into a JSON object, and then we're able to print that out down here. So what we can do is we can take all of this data, all of these products, and we can actually put them as the product's state. So what we're gonna do here, there's a couple different ways we can do it. I'll show you 2 ways that we can do this. So if you look here, each one of these products that we got back from the fake store API has a couple different fields. So they have a category, a description, an ID, an image, a price, and a title. So it has all these different like things on it that we can use. And that's all contained inside of this JSON. So maybe instead of calling this JSON, we can just call this products array. So what we want to do is we want to take all the products that are in this products array and we want to convert them into this product state. So I want to take all of these and I want to make it so that they can go inside of our product state. And this is another example where the map function is going to come in handy. So like we have all these fields on here. All we're really interested in is the title, right? Because that's all that we're displaying over here. So I could say, basically I want to map the products array into something that can go inside of this product state. So I just want to get an array that has all of the titles in it. So we could say this, new products list, or new products array, and I'm going to set this, or no, let's call this new products state. Sorry, my naming is off today. So we can say new product state is equal to products array dot map. And once again, this map function is going to allow us to take an item from all the items from one array and map them into items in another array. So I could take all 20 of these products and I can map them into like the product state and it would just be the title. So the way we would say that is we're going to make a arrow function. This is going to take in the product. And once again, if you're not understanding this, just you might need to do a little bit more research on the map function, but I'm going to return product and I just want to return the title of the product. So just this thing down here. So we could say product.title. So what this new product state is going to be is it's going to be an array that has all of the product titles in it that we got from that fake API. And then what we can do is we can say set product state as the new products state. So now, assuming we did everything right, let's check this out. I'm going to refresh the page. It's loading, but now instead of loading all of this stuff, it's loading the other stuff. Now we still have this timeout, so we can get rid of that. That's what's messing with it. But if we refresh, you'll see that now it loads all of these items that we got from over here. Okay. And all of those are in there and we can see them and stuff like that. Now, let me walk you through what happened here one more time, because I know this is complicated and this is probably the most complicated thing that we're going to do in this entire tutorial. So just keep that in mind. This is also more advanced, but there's this website called the Fake Store API. And if you make a request to this URL, like I did over here on my browser, instead of returning HTML, it'll return JavaScript objects, basically, like this JSON notation. So this fetch function is built into JavaScript and it's able to do that for us. So we're going to get all of this like JSON data back. We're going to convert it into something that JavaScript can understand, which is what we're doing right here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take all of that and we're just going to get the titles and we're going to put those into an array, and then we're going to store that into the product state. So obviously this is a little complex, but this is like, if you can understand this, like seriously, this is like half of what you do when you're working as a JavaScript developer. You're creating these components, or as a React developer, you're creating these components and then you're fetching data from an API, and then you're basically like putting it into a piece of state and then displaying it with a loading indicator. So this is like a very, 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 very common thing that we want to do. Okay, so there's another concept that I want to cover as well, which we're going to do, which is this. Basically, it's a way of making React components a little bit different. So if you look over on, okay, so here we are in app.js. Now this is a little bit complicated now that we've done a bunch of stuff, but you can see here, for example, when we render out the count button, so let's render that out, that we have, it's basically just like a self-closing tag. So we have the count button, it self-closes over here. That's all well and good, but there's another type of component that we can make, which is a component that has children in it. And I would say these are probably less common. Like these are probably the more common types of components that we can make. But like I said, there is another one as well. So we are going to create another component in here. So let's go make a new folder, and we are going to call this button. So this is going to be like a button component. And I know we've already created a count button, but I'm going to create like another button component, and you'll kind of see like how this works. So let's make a new folder, and we're going to make a new file called button.js. If you want, you can also create the style sheet as well if you want to style it. So once again, we'll go over this process. So in this new button.js, we're going to import React from React. And for some reason, Visual Studio Code always does that. And then we're going to create the constant. So this is going to be called our button component. And this is equal to an arrow function. Okay. And then finally, we're going to export default button. So this is the main structure, and then the button needs to return some JSX. And so there's a couple other concepts that I want to introduce with this button, but for now, we're just going to make it a div. Okay. So with this button, what I want to do is I want to allow the user, when they create the button, to be able to pass in some text. Okay, so let's go back over to app.js and let's import the button. So now we have a lot of code in here. I'm actually going to comment out this stuff. And over here, we're going to import button from button and button. Okay, so we're importing our button component. Now let's go ahead and render it down here. So here's our button, and we're rendering it just like we did with the other ones, and we need to put some text into here. So this is the button, and you'll see that it should show up over here. Perfect. Now, one use case with a button like this, and the reason that we might put it into its own component is because maybe we want to like style it a specific way or like give it a specific look or feel. So you could even call this like, flat button or material UI button, something like that. That's fair. But one of the things with these buttons is we might want to allow the user to put whatever text they want in there, right? Now, we've seen how we could do this with props. So I could say props, and then down here we could say props dot, maybe there's one called button text, right? So now this component is going to take a prop, which is called button text, and it's going to display it in here. So then over in app.js, when we render out the button, we're going to need to give it the button text, and we could say like my button, something like that, right? And you can imagine, maybe we've like styled this button a specific way. So I can give this some quick styling. So this is like a button that we're going to reuse all throughout our application. So maybe the color is like blue, and then maybe it's got like background, which is green, and border radius of like 5 pixels or something. And then, we'd attach like a different event listener or something to that. But we're passing in the text of the button through here, right? So if I have multiple buttons, then I can do this, right? This is like button 3, this is whatever. So now we have all of our different buttons, and they all have different text. So we can do this with just like a normal prop. But a lot of times in React, it just like doesn't make sense to do this, right? Because if you remember in HTML, like if I'm writing HTML and I want to create a button, I just do it like this and then I write the text here in the middle. So how do we get React to do that? React is going to be able to do that using something called the children prop. And the children prop is a special prop that's going to get passed into a React component when it has a closing tag. So over here, you can see with these buttons, like it just has, we would call this like a single tag or a self-closing tag. But if I was to do this, so let's get rid of all of this and then let's close it like this. And I could write in like hello world in here. Now check this out. If I come over here and we can remove some of this stuff. If I was to console log out the props, so I'm here in the button component. If I console log out the props, you'll see here that we get, and these warnings are annoying. So we get this children prop. So there is a children prop which has been passed into this component, and we can use that in order to inform what's in the button. So over here, instead of using like, props.button text like we did before, instead I can just say children. Or whoops, we have to say props.children. And now you can see that whatever is passed here into the center in between these two tags, that's what's going to end up going in the button. So now we can create like multiple buttons, hello world 2, hello world 3, and they'll all have this different text. So this is just another type of prop, but it's another way that we can do stuff like this. Okay, so I think that just about wraps it up for now. That's kind of everything that I wanted to cover in this video, and we've gone over a lot of the core concepts, okay? So we've got over a lot of the things that, like when I was working professionally as a React developer, these are a lot of the things that I would be using on a daily basis. This, people talk about like the 80-20 principle. This is the 20% that you're using 80% of the time. There's a lot of other things we can get into with React. A lot of things with React too is just about being comfortable with JavaScript. So I would say this, like if there's things in here that confuse you or that you don't understand, it may be because you don't have a solid grasp of JavaScript. And so that might be a place to look. Like I know a lot of these like map functions, the filter functions, these are really, really hard for beginners to understand. So obviously this isn't necessarily just like a complete beginner tutorial. So if you're confused and having trouble, it might be just because you don't understand one of those things. But otherwise, that does cover a lot of the core concepts in JavaScript. This is all the same stuff that, I've developed a bunch of corporate trainings. I've developed trainings for this. I've taught this in boot camps. This is all the stuff that we cover. So you've really learned all of this. Now, the last thing you need to do is just practice, just like build out different stuff, okay? And there's other things that we could cover as well, but I think that just about does it. So now it's on you. You just got to practice, practice, practice. Watch this video over again, and just try to combine all these things in like cool and different ways.